Bonsoir, bienvenidos, and welcome to the first Other Swing Voter Convening, Visioning Forward. In collaboration with DEMOS, the Center for Antiracist Research would like to thank everyone who has joined us for this afternoon of political education. I am Adeline Gutierrez Nunez, one of your hosts for today. Before we begin, we would like to observe a moment of silence for all of the lives that we have lost due to the coronavirus pandemic, to police brutality, and to the multiple environmental catastrophes that we have experienced this year alone. By no means has 2020 been easy. Considering the current moment that we find ourselves in, this convening is one intervention to save our American democracy. While we are focusing on the particularities of this country and our investment in civic engagement is one way that we are building and shifting power, we must not forget that the freedom struggle is global and that we must stand in solidarity with our siblings worldwide. As Black and Brown folks, especially the younger generation, we need a vision for the future of this country and the world, a vision that will sustain us and also nourish us. As we witnessed with last night's presidential debate, we cannot depend on anyone but ourselves to save or center ourselves. Today, we gather here to discuss the importance of the other swing voter. The other swing voter is defined as voters who oscillate between voting and not voting or voting third party. These voters are predominantly young Black and Latinx voters, and they must be at the center of anti-racist electoral organizing strategies, power building, and policy analysis. During this afternoon of political education, grassroots political organizers, as well as researchers and policymakers, will detail how to build cross-sectoral relationships that allow for knowledge sharing, analysis, and the development of freedom-forward strategies for organizing and sustaining this voting bloc. We will have 4 amazing panels, 15 minutes for intentional reflection, and a breathwork session. Under white supremacy, every moment seems urgent. But what is urgent is that we hold onto our joy and our rest as active resistance. What is urgent is that we hold on to our dreams for the future that is beyond the settler state and develop common language that'll move us forward. Regardless of what happens in November, we believe that the other swing voters are decisive political agents that have the ability to shift power. Welcome.
Thank you, Adeline. And welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Otier, and I am with DEMOS, a national think tank working to achieve a democracy and economy that works for all of us. DEMOS is especially excited to collaborate with the Antiracist Research Center at Boston University in response to some of the most pressing questions for our democracy in this moment. What does it mean to engage young voters of color who tend to vacillate not between voting Republican or Democrat, but between voting and not voting? How might our conception of civic education and engagement shift by focusing on the issues most important to these other swing voters? The panelists assembled today include scholars and grassroots leaders who are centering the experiences and the brilliance of young people of color as we together work to strengthen our democracy. One way that we do that at DEMOS is through our support of communities of color and working class communities through the Inclusive Democracy Project, a national cohort of grassroots leaders driving bold pro-democracy campaigns. And we are currently, as we are now excited to collaborate with the Antiracist Research Center on the Other Swing Voter Project because of our deep commitment to lifting up the brilliance of young people of color who are mobilizing their communities to shift power to working people and to ensure that in November, every voice is heard and every vote is counted. I do have just 2 housekeeping items. Just note for our viewers that this Zoom is being recorded and will be available after the show. Also, via Zoom, we will receive your questions, any questions you have for our panelists and presenters. We will use the chat function and monitor questions as they come up. And now I'll turn it back over to Adeline.
It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Ibram X Kendi. Ibram X Kendi is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University and the founding director of the Boston University Center for Antiracist Research. Please welcome Dr. Ibram X Kendi.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's truly an honor for me to address this convening, and I'm really excited to be in conversation in a few minutes with Dr. Cohen, and really excited that these organizers and thought leaders are really coming together to really put the other swing voter really at the center of really our American political thought. Earlier this year, in January, when Democratic candidates were jockeying for voters and votes, you had some Democratic candidates and certainly many politicos and political analysts trying to assess which Democratic candidate was most likely to win the swing voter. And it was imagined that the reason why Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, the premier reason why, was because of these Obama to Trump voters who were overwhelmingly white and in particularly older. And so it was imagined that if this new or the next presidential sort of candidate for the Democratic Party needed to be able to win back these Obama to Trump voters, because their swing, people argued, is the reason why Hillary Clinton lost and Donald Trump won. But it seemed to me, those of us who were actually studying the election in the totality were also realizing that something else was contributing or contributed to Clinton's loss. And that was all of those people who voted for Obama in 2012 and decided not to vote in 2016. But for many people, when they looked at these voters, they looked at them in shame, they ostracized them, they blamed them also for why, let's say, Clinton lost. But I sort of started to see, I was like, well, actually, these people swung too, just in a different type of way. And so while many white voters swung from Obama to Trump, what happened was another group of voters swung from Obama to not voting at all. And many of these voters were typically young. They were also people of color, but they were especially young people of color, and most especially young Black and Latinx voters when we were looking at the data. And so for me, I thought it was critical to highlight these other swing voters, as I ended up titling them in an essay in The Atlantic, because in many ways, they decided the 2016 election just as much as these traditional white swing voters. And I thought it was also important, particularly in the early part of this year, to highlight these voters, because the question was which candidates were exciting these young Black and Latinx voters. That should have also been a question that the Democratic Party in particular needed to ask, just as they were thinking about who was attracting these traditional white and older swing voters. I also thought it was important to name them the other swing voter, because in many ways, young Black and Latinx people have been othered in the political process, just as they've been othered in society more broadly. And they're othered because they're hardly sort of recognized at the table as being political agents. They're primarily shamed when they choose not to vote. It's not imagined. There's not an awareness and even a recognition of how voter suppression and even depression sort of affects their agency. And there's not a willingness to recognize how they're voicing their agency. They're saying to both political parties, you need to be putting forth candidates that excite us, that entice us, that are pushing policies that are going to impact our lives. And certainly we're not realizing how they're swinging and deciding elections. And fundamentally, young Black and brown voters, if not Black voters and Latinx voters more broadly, and young voters, are typically conceived of as people that need to be turned out. And that whole framing of turnout imagines young people and people of color as almost like political cattle, in which you have to sort of drive them to the polls. While in many ways, when we frame white folks, and particularly older white folks who are trying to decide between the Democratic and Republican Party as swing voters, what essentially we're saying is these people need to be persuaded to vote for a particular candidate. In other words, they're political free agents. And so one of the things that I've been, seeking for people to understand is that these young Black and Latinx voters are political free agents too. And they should be, their political agency needs to be recognized, and they need to be persuaded to the polls, and that we should not be imagining them as merely political cattle that have to be driven to the polls against their will. And that continues to reinforce racist ideas. It continues to reinforce forms of ageism. It continues to then sort of set the table for when particular parties or candidates lose, they blame those people as opposed to what the campaigns did not do. And so I think it's critically important for us to recognize the other swing voter in her and his and their political agency. And let me turn it over to Carol, who I think is going to introduce Dr. Cohen.
Thank you, Dr. Kendi. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kathy Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the David and Mary Winton Green Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago. She's also the founder of GenForward, and will tell us a bit more about that right now. I also want to personally thank Dr. Cohen for Boundaries of Blackness, because it changed my life many years ago. But thank you, Dr. Cohen, for being with us. And for those who don't know, can you share with us a bit about GenForward and what you've learned from it?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this very important conversation. I'm thinking of it as part of my healing process after watching that debate last night. So I really appreciate the conversation we're going to have. Let me just, I hate to do this, but I'm bringing data. So let me share my screen, and that should start us off. I will try to be as efficient as possible. And hopefully we'll get right into it. Just very quickly. Uh-oh, I lost my screen. Uh-oh. Can you all see my screen anymore? No, it went away. Let's try this again. Okay, can you see the screen? My screen? Hello, can you see my screen?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay, fantastic, great. All right, just very quickly. GenForward is a bi-monthly survey of 18 to 36-year-olds. The idea is to build a sample that allows us to disaggregate by race, ethnicity, gender, and other identities. Fundamentally, we are about amplifying the kind of views, the positions, the ideas of young people, in particular young folks of color, to speak to many of the issues that Ibram just defined. I want to try to do three things, and I'll try to do it quickly. I want to talk a little bit about the vote, a little bit about what young people want, and a little bit about radical futures. And then hopefully that will kind of mesh nicely with what we just heard about the other swing voter. Let me just say that the first thing I'm usually asked, because I always have data, is will they vote in 2020? And I think this speaks to this idea of Democrats in particular being concerned more about turnout than in fact engaging young voters, in particular young voters of color. And what we see is, majorities or near majorities of young people say that they plan to vote, but we know that that is dependent on voter suppression and intimidation. We know it's dependent on an infrastructure around mobilization. And really, it should be dependent on candidates that speak to the lived condition of young people and their preferences and what they see as the future that they want to find. I'm just going to put this slide up because there is also this kind of panic that's happening. And it's a narrative about Black men and Latinx men voting for Trump. And I think, again, if we go back to the framework of the other swing voter, yes, there's concern about some men of color voting for Trump in particular, but really it is this question of I will vote for someone else, a third party, or I will not vote, that I think has to kind of grab our attention. Why is it, in fact, that young folks, and in particular Black and Latinx young people, believe that, in this case, the Democratic candidate doesn't speak to them, and they're willing to sit this out, as is their right? Here's in part the Biden problem, right? Which is young people aren't enthusiastic about Biden. When we ask young people who are planning to vote for Trump, if you're enthusiastic about him, majorities say yes. When you ask about Joe Biden, majorities say that they're voting because, in fact, they dislike the other candidate, namely Trump, right? Negative enthusiasm can drive people to the polls, but I'm not sure it's the way in which you want to engage your political base, right? Just really quickly, a couple other things is if we ask someone about kind of the coronavirus pandemic and who's better to handle it, young Black likely voters overwhelmingly say Biden. Black non-likely voters, or I would like to call them potential voters, still need to be, as Ibram said, persuaded, right? They don't know if, in fact, Biden would be better than someone else. And we have to pay attention to engaging them and persuading them. We see the same thing here around law and order. So let me go very quickly to the issue of what they want and how they get it. Part of, I would argue, the problem with the Democrats, in this case Biden, is I'm not sure that he can address the things that in particular young Black people care about. We've been doing this survey since 2016, and we have a question that says, what's the most important problem facing this country? And I would say 85 to 90% of the time, young African Americans say racism. They said it in 2016, 2017, 2018, and beyond, right? So this is not a new phenomenon. They are saying that the structural conditions of anti-Blackness, right, devalue their life, present difficulties and challenges, and that has to be addressed. And here's the other thing. They don't necessarily believe that, in fact, voting for president is the way to address this. Now, we can come back to the slide at some point, but what I want you to notice is that when we give them a number of options, including voting in national elections, it doesn't even show up in the top three, right? For young African Americans, it is revolution, let's take that serious, nonviolent protests, and organizing, right? So you have young people saying, what's important to me is that we deal with systemic racism. And I don't even believe that the mechanism in front of us can deal with that question. They are committed right now to the issue of protest, right? To the structure of protest, the strategy. They believe overwhelmingly and support Black Lives Matter. They believe, in fact, that the protests across the country are justified overwhelmingly. They believe, in fact, that, and this isn't quite right, the movement sparked by the killing, the movement was there before the killing of George Floyd, though, will have a long-term impact on race relations, right? And they believe, unlike the vice president said last night, that the killing of Black people, right, by the police, that's not a part of an isolated incident, but instead part of a larger pattern in police's mistreatment of Black Americans. It is not a few bad apples phenomena. They understand the systemic nature of racism in policing. So what do they want? Right? The question is, how do we kind of pull together an agenda that speaks to how young Black people and young Latinx people, right, understand their futures and what they want? They want, right? They support a UBI, a universal basic income benefit, where each individual, each adult gets $1,000 a month, right? They believe that the government should guarantee people a job if people want to work. They're asking for an expansive nature of the state, of the government. They believe that there should be free tuition at public colleges for those who want to go to college, right? They believe in eliminating jail or prison for nonviolent offenses. Theirs is a kind of more radical future, an expansive state that gives people and their generation the opportunities that other generations have had in the past. Now, I want to say it's a little more complicated than that, than just saying they want this is what they see, right? There's also this room of trying to figure out what they want. When we ask a question about defund or abolish the police, majorities do not support that at this point. But what do they support? They support overwhelmingly creating a new agency, right, of first responders that are focused on de-escalation and providing mental health services, right? And they support to some degree, right, taking some of the budget or the entire budget from police departments and investing in other areas such as healthcare, education, and housing, right? All this is to say towards this point that if we're really thinking about the other, right, swing voter, we have to be speaking to their vision of a just society. We can't, as Ibram says, be focused only on turnout. It has to be about persuasion. It has to be about engagement. And we have to take their political freedom, their political agency as something serious. All right, so I'll stop there and then we can open it up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, and Dr. Kendi as well. And we invite our viewers to submit questions in the Zoom chat. We'll be monitoring those. But I'm wondering, given your research, and this question is really for both of you, what do you see as untapped opportunities for mobilizing young voters of color right now?
Wow.
You want to go first?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, I suspect Dr. Cohen would say it better than me, but it seems as if particularly many Black, Asian, and Latinx voters have a progressive politic. And so to put together sort of a progressive candidate and a progressive agenda, it seems as if it would be quite attractive to particularly these other swing voters. I also think, obviously, if you have voters and they've been saying, as the data shows for 5 years, that racism is at the top of their agenda, then racism must be at the top of the agenda of any political party that's trying to attract them. I mean, that's, to me, you know, what's fascinating to me, let me just say, you know, many Democrats now are saying, well, what most Americans care about is healthcare. And that's true. But when you say Americans, you need to specify what Americans you're talking about. Because if you're talking about young voters of color, what's at the top of their list is racism. Now, I suspect healthcare is right there too, right? But I think that type of specificity would be critical when we're thinking about organizing and persuading people.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I think an agenda that speaks to the conditions, in particular of young people, in particular of young Black and Latinx people, has to be part of the way in which we mobilize them, if we're thinking about that, or at least engage them to think about voting. And what do I mean? I mean that, you know, these are generations, both millennials and Gen Zers, who have entered the economy, not only facing systemic racism, but the recession of 2008, and now the recession associated with the coronavirus pandemic, right? These are young people who will have possibly less opportunity for things like buying a house than their parents did. These are young people who are burdened by student debt at a level that we've never seen before in this country, right? And so it seems to me, when we say, okay, the country, supposedly the country's number one issue is healthcare, As Dr. Kennedy said, we have to really begin to kind of disaggregate that. That's the point of GenForward, which is to say, there is a political project in saying, no, when you represent the public, you're really representing a primarily white sample. And when we begin to really kind of look at young people and young people of color, they have a different lived experience and a different political agenda that they want pursued. And it's often a progressive or radical agenda that is hard for the Democrats to really engage when they're trying to protect, and they believe, in fact, that their futures are tied to mobilizing a kind of white working class agenda.
Thank you both. We have a question from our audience. The election is only weeks away. What's likely to push other swing voters to vote or to not vote?
So I'll jump in, and then Ibram can clean it all up. I think it's in part the agenda, right? I mean, when Vice President Biden, goes on television and says, no, we shouldn't defund. In fact, we should give the police more money, right? When he says, yes, there's systemic inequality, but really it's just about a few bad apples. I don't think that is a kind of mobilizing message for young people. But let's be clear, part of the way in which people get to the polls is about the agenda and message, but part of it is about the infrastructure of mobilization. Are there people in your community contacting you to make sure that, in fact, you're registered? Are they engaging with you about the political agenda of the Biden-Harris, what a Biden-Harris administration would look like, right? Are the polls in your neighborhood open? Are you aware that you can vote by mail, right? There's also a mobilization infrastructure that has to happen. And so the question is, has there been the investment in that infrastructure? Has there been an investment in the local community-based organizations that can do that work, or movement allies that are willing to do this work? So it seems to me in the next 2 weeks, we have to make sure that people are registered, they know where they vote, and we have to give them a reason to go to the polls. And that means engaging with them about message and what's possible. Last thing I'll really say is, I think the other framing of this, and I heard, I think Mercedes Fulbright say this, which is, we're not arguing that Biden is ideal for young folks of color. In fact, I have said, you vote against Trump, you organize against Biden, right? But that a vote for Biden, let's say, is a more fruitful organizing context than a possible second Trump administration. So that may be the message. All right.
Absolutely. That's very helpful. Thank you.
And if I can just add very briefly, just to sort of, add to what Dr. Cohen said, I think when you frame these other swing voters, and one thing I wanted to specify that I didn't specify in my opening talk is we're really talking about people who are typically registered to vote, and they're trying to decide whether they're going to vote, let's say for the Democratic candidate. And sometimes they vote and sometimes they don't. These are very different than folks who never vote, right? And so there was a massive swing in people who voted before and didn't vote in 2016. So with these specific voters, for you your message to be, you are a complete disgrace to the race if you don't vote, for that to be your message, as opposed to, I completely understand if Biden is as Dr. Cohen said, you're not an ideal candidate, but we can build on Biden, right? And I think that it's all about framing, because if you're thinking you need to persuade somebody as opposed to shame somebody, then that's going to lead, I think, to a more persuasive argument. The other thing I would say, weeks before the election, is what makes it unbelievably difficult for these young voters of color, and even young white voters, is they are simultaneously less likely to be attracted to the Democratic candidate, and they're most likely to be subject to the voter suppression. So what you're now asking the very folks who it's hardest for them to vote, you're also asking them to vote for a candidate that they may not particularly like. So you may not be able to get them to like the candidate, but you can figure out ways, as Dr. Cohen said, to make it easier for them to vote.
Thank you for that. You know, I'm also thinking of the Amendment 4 fight down in Florida, right? Like, I recall that during that campaign, formerly incarcerated people were mobilizing their family, their community members, saying, you know, I can't vote, be my voice, be my vote. And so I'm wondering about the relational aspect, right, that we might point to as being critical to engaging and energizing these other swing voters to be more involved. And wondering if you have thoughts about, I mean, we're all focused obviously on the presidential election, but what do you think is the role of local state politics for better engaging and tapping into the priorities of this population?
Well, I will, oh, go ahead.
No,
go. Go ahead.
Let me just say in two senses. First, I think they're even more critical in persuading these other swing voters, because they can be saying to these voters, particularly if they're more progressive candidates, as city council women or congresswomen, you know, they can be saying, you know, I'm going to fight for your political agenda, so vote for me and also vote for that other person, right? You know, they can essentially sort of do that.
I was going to agree. I mean, I think when you look at some of the data that I shared, when we ask about the best way to make racial progress, right? It is not a national election. When elections show up, it's state and local elections, right? When we talk to young activists about their relation to the electoral arena, while, you know, some movements are doing electoral justice work at the national level, a lot of people are thinking about prosecutors, right? Or city council members and mayors, in part because, in fact, it feels, I don't want to say easier, but it feels like one can hold those individuals accountable in a different way than you can at the national level. But also there are, I would argue, more progressive, more radical, more socialist democratic candidates there that do speak to the agenda and the kind of radical visions, radical dreams that many young voters of color might have. So I think that's a critical perspective in terms of getting people there. And once you're there, you know, the first question you're confronted with is who you're going to vote for president. But so I think to only have a national strategy is to make a mistake. And to your point, to really be thinking about kind of the local level as providing a much more diverse set of candidates, but also a much more possibly radical agenda is an important way to pull people into the voting booth.
Thank you for that. You know, at Demos, our theory of change is that focusing on voters of color, Black voters and other voters of color, is a better strategy for putting together a winning electoral coalition than trying to win the so-called Obama-Trump voters, white voters that the Democratic Party always centers. Does the math back that up, Dr. Cohen, in your research? Many people say that there just aren't enough votes there.
Well, if we only take those who have turned out before, maybe what Ibram would talk about is that the other swing voters who have shown up. But if, in fact, we have a calculus of expanding those who are part of the base and who can go out and vote, right, then the math does work, right? If we get into an election that is a turnout, your base, meaning the base of people who have voted in the past, then in certain places, due to the kind of racism of the Electoral College, right, we are confronted with some difficulties. But I want to make the argument that, in fact, and this has been difficult, I understand, under the coronavirus pandemic, that the strategy has to be one of expansion with a focus on voters of color, right? That it has to be increasing the number of young people who go to the polls, who are registered, and who believe, in fact, that the candidates speak to them, right? I know that, in fact, for many people in this election, for example, it's base against base. And if you think, in fact, that Democrats have a larger base that includes some of those former white Obama voters, then you're confined to say, I can depend on those people to vote, and that's going to be the group I try to turn out. But I think if we're really imagining the ways in which we can move forward a progressive agenda, then you're going to have to expand that base with a focus on folks of color. Yeah.
Thank you. And to build on that, we have, I'm sorry, Dr. Kendi, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add some quick data to sort of, support what Dr. Cohen was saying. And I think the 2016 election is a great example in which, Clinton lost basically 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, by combined 80,000 votes. And in Michigan, 75,000 voters in Detroit alone who were Obama voters did not vote in 2016. In Wisconsin, Clinton received 230,000 fewer voters than Obama did in 2012. And much of that difference came in Milwaukee, which had its lowest voting rate in 16 years. In Philadelphia, one study after the election found that the greater percentage of Black people at a precinct, the lower its voting rate, leading Clinton to lose an estimated 35,000 votes. And so the numbers are actually there. Like if in terms of the other thing some would say is, well, if you focus on these young voters and particularly these young Black and Latinx progressive voters, then you'll turn off some of these Obama to Trump voters. But the data even doesn't sort of support that. So to give an example, in 2016, Trump managed to win 20% of liberal white working class voters and 38% of those who desired policies more liberal than Obama's policies. So when you think of the people who swung from Obama to Trump, part of their swing is because Trump somehow, some way was able to project himself as progressive, right? Particularly as related to the economy. And that attracted sort of voters. And so when you actually look at these two groups, meaning the Obama-Trump voters and the Obama sort of non-voters, you actually see areas of a convergence, particularly around desires for a higher minimum wage, particularly around climate change. And so again, this is why I was making this case that it's actually better, to even get these white swing voters, particularly those who are liberal, by focusing on these young Black, progressive, and Latinx voters of color.
Thank you for that. We do have a question about the role of higher education or universities and colleges in motivating these other swing voters. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about better ways to engage BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous, people of color students in voting and civic engagement broadly.
Who's speaking?
Either of you, if you have thoughts about that.
Well, okay, I will say that I think I think there are sites on university that can serve as important places of political education and political discussion, right? At the University of Chicago, I would say the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture is a place like that where we are thinking about questions of defunding the police, both nationally, but even on campus, right? So, the university can be an important site. There can also be, however, I think greater attention to what it means to ensure that young folks on campuses have, again, access to the ballot, right? Whether they are voting where they are or voting in their home state. You know, we have to also remember that young people can hopefully be strategic about where, in fact, they place their vote. But I think, again, there has to be a kind of heightened awareness, excitement to the issues that these young people are confronting. So, for example, when we see, 80 to 90% of young adults saying they support free public education, if we're able to speak to that issue and then go to college campuses and mobilize people around this issue that so defines how they are living their lives, when we can talk about what it means for young people to be burdened by student debt, right, in the college environment, it seems to me we have a better chance of leveraging and using those issues to get people to go to the polls and to turn out. So there are entities on campus for public education. There should be entities and attention to, again, registering and making sure there's a strategic choice about how people vote. But we can also speak to the issues that define what it is to be a student in this country. And that varies by institution, let's be very clear. But if we understand the lived condition and the things that are pressing and concerns of young folks of color on college campuses or young people on college campuses, you should be able to mobilize them based on those issues and concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Dr. Kendi, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, and I can just add that, there was a time in this country not long ago in the 1960s when civic instruction in high schools and I suspect colleges was pretty standard. And those three standard high school courses in civics instruction began to decline in the 1960s. What also started to decline was the voting rates of young people. And so for me, I think that just to add to what Dr. Cohen said, if we could figure out a way to systematically teach high school aged children, about the critical importance of civic engagement. And then when they come to college, we have courses on power and what power is. I think the next course I teach probably is going to be titled Introduction to Power or something like that, right? Because I'm just finding that Americans more broadly just do not understand what power is, right? And how power operates and how the individual has power and the difference between individual and systemic sort of power, and what organizational power is and how organizational power can challenge systemic power and the role of the individual in formulating that organizational power, and the role of anyway. So, I'm not meaning to teach the course now, but I think just the teaching of courses and standardizing these courses, our students are required to teach our students are required to take so many different courses. Why can't they also take a course in power?
I'm sorry, can I jump in on that? And I promise to be very short here, brief, not short. So one of the things that we've seen is an increase in states requiring civics courses. But we also know that those civics courses are very traditional in terms of their understanding of power in the state, that they can be alienating because, in fact, students of color have had, sadly, so many interactions with the state, usually the carceral state, right? Over-policing, hyper-policing. And so can we do what Ibram said, which is to craft a vision even of civics, right? That centers power, that centers resistance, that places voting as one tool among many, including protests and uprisings, and as the young Black people in our survey said, revolution, right? To make the larger political community pay attention and respond to their needs, their visions, their preferences. And I think we are seeing this on campus. I would argue that the ability for the movement for Black lives to center Black feminism, intersectionality, a Black queer feminist lens, in part has to do with what many organizers, the courses they took, the books they read, the conversations they had in college classes. So, there is some boundary crossing that I think is important between what's happening, at least in certain parts of the university, not most, certain parts, right? And its ability to spur both voting, but also protest and uprising.
Absolutely. I think this is related in that the absence of civic education shifts the expectations folks may have of their elected officials. So from your perspective, what can be done to hold electeds accountable in between election cycles so that youth experience politics and politicians in a more meaningful and positive way? As a movement, how do we position young people so that they can stay connected to elected officials and hold their feet to the fire as needed?
I don't feel like I can answer that question first with one of the world's great political scientists.
Don't even do that. Don't even do that. I'm gonna, you know what? What can we do? There's some skepticism on my part, like elected officials. I think we're watching movements, right, redefine what it is to hold officials accountable, right? That, in my own incredible city of Chicago that was maligned yet again last night, what we have seen is young activists, right, intervene and organize around a prosecutor's race to help elect a more progressive prosecutor, but even then to say, we will hold you accountable, right? Like, we're not invested in you, we're invested in just policies for Black people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a different way of relating to any elected official, right? It is not to say that you are the key. It is to say that the policies that represent the needs of the community is what we're pushing. And if you are with us, you are with us. If you are against us, you are against us. And it has nothing to do with whether you're a Democrat or Republican, a democratic socialist, right? That type of understanding of accountability. The other thing I will say is, I think increasingly in movement spaces, people are beginning to realize and deciding that they can run their own people, right? That they can run progressive candidates, in particular at the local level. And if in fact we get a critical mass there, we can begin to see policies that reflect, again, the preferences, the needs, the kind of freedom dreams of communities of color, of BIPOC communities. So I think there is a possibility for protests, mobilizing, uprisings to really change and reframe how people are thinking about the political. Last thing I'm going to say really quickly, though, is at its most basic level, the way in which we hold elected officials accountable is that there's civic infrastructure in communities, right? That there are protest organizations, that there are organizers, right? We can't be dependent on politicians coming back. We have to have a movement infrastructure that allows communities to be mobilized all the time to hold elected officials accountable. And that's why I think, in fact, this movement infrastructure in community is probably the most important key to the democratic process and holding elected officials accountable.
I agree, and I think that's one of the. Let me give an example of a movement infrastructure we're even trying to build at the BU Center for Antiracist Research. One of the things we're in the process of building is what we're calling a racial policy tracker. And so Dr. Cohen mentioned about, really assessing the policies that policymakers are supporting or instituting or proposing. And what we can certainly do as researchers is we can be assessing the racial impact of those policies and making that available to local organizers so that they can then tell, an elected official, your policies, this specific policy is leading to injustice, and inequity. And I think that those are the types of things we can build. We're not, I think, we're not looking to elected officials to hold themselves accountable, and we're also not expecting everyday people who have to go to work every day to be able to assess the racial impact of these sophisticated policies. We have to do that as researchers. That's our expertise, and allow the sort of advocates and grassroots organizations on the ground, to do what they do best, which is pressure, which is protest, which is drive home, policy change.
Thank you for that. We have a question about, given the attacks on critical race theory, some of your research, Dr. Kendi, how will we continue to work towards an anti-racist society, given the attacks on the very theories, tools that have been created to help us address racial inequities in this time?
I think that for me, I think it was Toni Morrison, who said that racism can be a distraction. And so for me, those who are moving against our work, our anti-racist work, our critical race theory, they're trying to distract us, and certainly devastate and destroy us. But for me, that should be expected. I mean, you take, abolitionists as an example, and certainly we have current day, prison and even police abolitionists. Abolitionists throughout American history have been ostracized and demonized, even when they were saying something like slavery should end, right? They were viewed as the problem. They were viewed as one of the causes why, the South or certain Southern states needed to, quote, succeed, because they were being invaded. They were being oppressed by these abolitionists who were anti-American, who were destroying the Southern way or the American way of life. This is old news. And I think we should, we should recognize that, and we shouldn't let this distract us.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think this is a moment for scholars in the academy to understand themselves as the subjects and targets of oppressive measures coming from the Trump administration, to understand that we are, laborers, to think about the ways in which we resist also. I would also differentiate the attack on critical race theory from the attack on diversity trainers, right? I think those of us who consider ourselves progressive scholars also have a critique of diversity trainers, right? At the University of Chicago, there are a group of faculty who have, I feel proud to be a part of that group, who are advancing a campaign called More Than Diversity, because in fact, we believe that the framework of diversity is a neoliberal project within the university, right? To focus on representation and not, as Ibram just talked about, a real shift in power, right? In the end, that is what we are striving for. I'm not just striving for the university to look more diverse. I want it fundamentally to have different commitments. I want it to be responsive to communities that surround it, to be able to make sure that students of color do have an avenue in and do have some control over that agenda. So yes, there will be attacks from the Trump administration, and we will have to mobilize, something scholars are not very good at doing, but we will have to mobilize in response. But I would say that part of the nervousness is that we are seeing scholars. We're seeing the UC campuses demand the abolishment of campus police within a year, right? We're seeing UCLA Black scholars mobilize. We're seeing Black scholars at Tufts saying no more police. We're seeing, again, the University of Chicago scholars saying, in fact, we want more than diversity, and we have 5 points that we demand from this administration. So, why shouldn't we be attacked, and why shouldn't we mobilize? This is a moment of where everything has to be reconsidered. This is a moment where, in fact, we have to stand together and mobilize against, those who would decry critical race theory or who would try to take that out of the classroom. It shouldn't be a surprise to us. We just need to be prepared.
I really appreciate that. In times of deep despair, I think sometimes the only antidote is really our solidarity, our work together, and really encouraged by what you just shared. As we end our session, thinking about how to encourage ourselves and each other to be fully engaged right now, what gives you hope based from your research and what you've learned from these other swing voters?
Oh, well, for me, I can say very, very quickly, what gives me hope is the types of organizers who are even going to be presenting and speaking and politically educating today during this convening. I mean, just the unbelievable amount of talent. And what I mean by talent is people who are committed to transforming this country, to transforming this world, to seizing power, to creating justice and equity for all, who's willing to sacrifice, who is willing to sort of be courageous. I mean, it's just on a whole nother level. And these are the folks, particularly young people, who give me hope.
Yeah, I mean, I could say ditto to that. Yes, it is the young people who are moving into the streets to say no more. It is the movement for Black Lives and organizations like Dream Defenders and BYP 100. And, I could go on, who have been there for a very long time, right? Who are setting up the movement infrastructure, the movement environment in which we're all benefiting. Young people who are willing to put their bodies on the line, who are willing to advance new ways of understanding, of being, of connecting. This is a very special moment. And I think we all have to step up and do whatever we can to support their leadership, their vision, and their demands for a different, more progressive, more equitable society. And I applaud them for all the work that they're doing.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you, Dr. Kendi. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. And thank you to our viewers. Our next panel will begin in 1 minute.
Thank you.
What a powerful session from Dr. Kendi and Dr. Kathy Cohen, talking about how we can engage within our communities and really start to interrogate this idea of what it means to engage the other swing voter. My name is Arshel Telemak, and I am a student at Boston University, and I will be moderating this second session of the Other Swing Voter Visioning Forward virtual convening, where we offer ideas about how we challenge this political moment and engage these young Black and Latinx voters who have differing ideas about what it means to be civically engaged. In this session, we talk about building power, organizing through and beyond elections. And here we have youth leaders who will share their go-to strategies to encourage civic engagement and build political engagement among young high school and college students. On this panel, we have Nikki Franco, who is the Civic Engagement Organizer at Power U, Lamonte Moore, who serves as the Director of College Organizing at Leaders Igniting Transformation, and Cindy Trujillo-Tena, who is the Director of High School Organizing at Leaders Igniting Transformation. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Well, I'd like for us to go ahead and get started. And I'd like to start with Nikki and Power U. I'd love if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you do with Power U, and how Power U works within its broader community.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just really grateful to be in digital space with you all and in conversation. Yeah, so Power U, we're based in Liberty City, a historically Black neighborhood in Miami, Florida. And we've been in the community for the past 21 years. Initially, we started as a housing anti-gentrification organization, but in the early 2000s, switched over to youth organizing as there was a moment of brutality by one of the administrators at a local school here. And that kind of totally pivoted the sort of work that we do at Power U. In most recent years and kind of the last decade, we've been really focusing on restorative justice and uplifting non-punitive forms of addressing conflict, of addressing discipline, and also just simply fighting for public education as Florida becomes a sort of testing ground for privatization and charterization. We've been using an invest divest framework, so been having our young folks sort of contend with a yearly budget cycle in the school board. And for us, Miami's the fourth largest school board in the country. So it's been, we'll get into it.
Awesome.
But happy to be.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And Lamonte and Cindy, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about Leaders Igniting Transformation, or LIT, and you can tell us about the work that you do and how you all work within your broader community.
Cool. I'll start off, and then it's Lamont as well. I know the E throws people off. My mom was trying to be bougie when she named me, so.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries. So yeah, name is Lamont Moore. I'm the college director at Leaders Igniting Transformation, or LIT for short. So we're a fairly new organization. We've been around, kind of really our inception kind of kicked off like beginning of 2018, but kind of the idea kind of really came into fruition in 2017. But yeah, we're Black and Brown. I like to use melanated Black and Brown led organization. And that's kind of our target. We kind of started off, well, I'll let Cindy kind of talk about her department, but started off more high school. And as of this year, January 1, that's when we kind of kicked off the college department. So we're on 9 different campuses across the state in Wisconsin, kind of spread all out, and really just seeing the need for organizing amongst college students, specifically once they transition from high school, but understand a lot of our organizing history, specifically for melanated people, has really always kind of been fueled on college campuses. So understanding the need in the moment that we're in, not only in Wisconsin, but the nation as well.
Yeah, speaking of Wisconsin, and not just because I work at LIT, but I think LIT is really special. Because if you know anything about Wisconsin, and then Milwaukee in particular, Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. It was named the worst city to raise a Black child. If you know anything about the former governor, Scott Walker, you know of all the attacks he did on public education, on the Black community, on working class people, on immigrant students, and then undocumented people as well. So it's really challenging to organize here, but it's been really rewarding. As Lamont said, our focus for the first 2 years of our existence was very like high school level, which is mainly students who aren't eligible to vote yet. But we'll get into why it's so important to invest in them from a really young age. And at the high school level, our focus is to dismantle the school to prison to deportation pipeline in Milwaukee public schools through the help of our youth power agenda, which is also like an invest divest framework and calls for divestment from policing and everything that has contributed to the failure of students and reinvest that into their success.
Beautiful. And you all have touched on this a little bit just in your introductions, but I'd like to go into this question a little further. You're working with people who are in high school, as young as high school age people, which can be a difficult group to engage and connect with, especially about these broader topics. So what do your organizing efforts look like when you're going to high schools or your community, communicating with college students about your mission? And if we could start off with Cindy, that would be perfect.
Yeah, actually, I was reading over the questions this morning again, and I was like, it's hard, especially because, you know, when I think about many of the movements and the fact that a lot of movements have been taken up by people who aren't actually affected by the issue and how wrong that is. So when you, for example, like the campaign that I work on, the Invest Divest, when you take an issue like that and you purposely want to engage the ones who are most affected by this, but that comes with a lot of hardships, right? The most marginalized Black and Brown young people in high school or middle school, whatever, have a lot to deal with. They often come from single parent households or unstable households. They have to work. They have to help take care of younger siblings. They don't have transportation. They're facing housing and food insecurity and many other things, right? And they have every reason to not want to be involved. They have every reason to have like a very pessimistic view on life because they don't have many people around them telling them you can change the things, around you and the things that are affecting you. So it's really challenging to engage young people, especially when, they are the ones that are affected the most by your issue, but it's really rewarding because they know the issue better than anyone else. They are the ones that are living through it. And it's important that we continue to amplify their voices and that we're centering them, and not other folks.
Wonderful. And if Nikki, if you want to take this question and answer from the perspective of Power You.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really appreciate what you said, Sandy, because it's like, yeah, it's not easy. We pretty much, our entire membership is folks ages 12 or really like 13 to 18. And yeah, there's all these tensions that come up. But I think something that, and Lamont, you referred to it, like historically, although we've been suppressed of our own history in terms of movement and liberation struggle, across the world, it's been young people and the front lines, right? So I do think we're just kind of trying to step back into our lineage of radical tradition, where it is young people trying to embody transformation, trying to embody rigor and discipline, and really like do the work. I think to be more specific, yeah, it's been a challenge in the sense that Florida, very similar. It's a very tough state, and we're kind of battling a lot of privatization right now. Kind of our unions are being decimated, and with all of that, I think the young people, even though they might not have the immediate language that we might be sharing in this conversation right now, young folks have like very high intuitive knowledge where they know that things are not okay. They know it's not right that every morning you walk into school, whether you're an elementary kid or a high schooler, you have to be greeted by a police officer because of our Florida legislature that demands at least one police officer across every single school in our state. Folks know it's not okay to not have access to the arts, to music, to recreational spaces. Folks know it's not okay to not have public space of youth development. Folks know it's not okay that they have no one to talk to, that there's no mental health counselor on staff. Folks know that, and I think kind of the work that we're doing as organizers is also equipping young people with the tools and the context and a little bit of more history and like budget analysis to understand why are these things happening. But yeah, I also don't want to underestimate that like young people also know, like they know what it is, right? And I think our job is filling in the gaps.
Right. And thinking about that, filling in the gaps, and also thinking about how you reach these young voters, you're talking about how it can be the barrier of entry is just reaching them in the first place, because there's a lot going on within their own personal lives that might not be so easy to access them. So what are some strategies that you've seen your organizations and you yourselves employ to reach these young people? What are the tactics that have been really effective in reaching this young, aspiring, and also this now voting bloc in our nation's history? And we can start off with Lamont if you want to go ahead and take that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the big thing is meeting folks where they are, especially young folks, regardless if it's high school or college students. Like everybody kind of alluded to, I mean, they have a lot of issues, whether it's in the home, rather it's just like their makeup of like the intersection of their being. And then of course school as well, and then work, especially on like what we see with college students. A lot of them, depending on the background, are working multiple jobs along with a heavy course load. So I think meeting them where they are, and then with that, really employing them with the tools to be able to organize and understand like the moment, and like the issues around like that they care about and that they're going through. So I mean, that looks like for us is just like really being engaged, and as much as possible now with COVID, more so virtually, but and historically, definitely meeting them on campuses, putting together different events, organizing. Those have been like the main strategies. But like just really meeting them where they are is like the big thing, like having an understanding and building that relationship.
Right. And if we can have Cindy, Nikki, anything you'd like to add on to that about the strategies and tactics that you all employ to really meet these young people where they are.
Yeah, I really, really love what you said, Lamont. I think so much of our work is around building relationships. A key relationships for us have also been with teachers, right? Like they're kind of the ones that let us actually come through to a classroom, actually do our presentation, actually do activities, actually like have that initial contact with students, for them to then like actually show up to our center and then like do meetings and political education sessions. But yeah, that's a really key relationship, teachers, which in this moment, teachers and students are kind of not always in solidarity, right? Like we've seen them be put in really antagonistic dynamics. So it's been really, really beautiful to also kind of like contradict that.
I'd also add that building authentic relationships is super important, and as well as having people that look like the young people we're trying to attract as well. Because if the young people don't feel like they can relate to you, then they aren't going to listen much to you. And then too, like you want to be, very open-minded, very willing to unlearn, and just like see yourself as being on the same level as them too. At LID, like we're super careful about the way that we interact with young people, the way, when they do say or maybe do something that seems problematic, actually taking the time to educate them on, the harm that they did or whatnot. Because if you just like lash out on young people or try to like scold them for what they did, you're going to push them away. So it's very important that we're being open-minded, that we remind ourselves that we weren't born knowing everything that we know now, and that young people have a long, journey to go through. But when you approach them the right way, they are capable of doing many great things.
And at the core of Power U and LIT's work, it's all about political education, right? So how do you come at this idea of political education when some of the topics aren't so easy to just talk about in maybe a 5-minute discussion that you might have with somebody as you're passing by? There are terms like heteropatriarchy, or how do you explain economic justice in just one sentence? What are some of the ways that you can really meet people where they are, but do it in a way that's effective to their long-term growth in political education? And anybody can turn on their mic and take this one.
Yeah, I love this question. Something I'm constantly thinking about. But I think back to my earlier point is we might not have the terms like political economy and heteropatriarchy and capitalism, but we actually do know how these things impact our lives, right? We know what precarity does to our family dynamics. We know the violence and trauma that's related to that. We know how gender roles play out. We know what it's like to have to budget and prioritize amongst essentials. We know what it's like to have to work multiple jobs. Like, we've actually seen and lived these things in a way that maybe hasn't been theorized for us. But I actually think that when we're doing political education, right, I think, for example, heteropatriarchy, when we're trying to unpack this, you know, when you give folks like a space, we have plenty of examples of how that shows up in our lives. And we just don't have space to unpack that in a safe way. And I think, yeah, that kind of plays out, that dynamic plays out across all these topics. And I also think that our role as organizers and maybe as facilitators in this space is also to be very intentional around how we frame these conversations in a way that counteracts like the educational system, which says, hey, I'm the facilitator, I'm the organizer, I have all the knowledge, I have all the words, and you're just here to kind of like take it all in, but really be rooted in like popular education and like just encourage dialogue. We just, as like oppressed, working class, Black and brown people, we don't have space to talk about these, right? We like, these spaces have been taken away from us, and we've had our history also taken from us, amongst many, many other things. So yeah, I think, yes, there's many challenges. And at the same time, I think that when young people are allowed to step into their agency, we actually see that we know more than what the system tells us that we do.
And throwing it over to Lit, what are these ways? You have these heady topics that might not be so easily to condense. What are some other ways that you really try and teach people in a way that isn't so off-putting?
I can go, Cindy, if that's cool. I mean, I think Nikki kind of like killed it, but I'll chime in as best as possible. But I think, again, back to what I said, I think, again, meeting them where they are, because like Nikki said, like even though they don't name it by these specific names, they know and experience it every day. So like understanding, I mean, specifically when I think about economic justice, for example, like specifically our population of folks who we organize and who we are trying to help to build up, they are the ones suffering the most. So like when I have a conversation, like even when we talk about like reparations, for example, or talk about the misdistribution of wealth, like I can speak to a 14-year-old or a 22-year-old who understands that 90% of the wealth in America is owned by white people, where 2.6% is owned by Black folks, and that we built this country. And like, this is a manifestation of slavery and all Jim Crow and all these different things that has us and has them and their family in the predicament that we're currently in. And I think for me, when I work with the high school students and now even with the college students, is really challenging them to be the author of their own thoughts. I think as specifically as melanated folks, we are already taught certain things, and just as humans socialized to think certain ways. So like, how do you challenge everything? I always use this analogy that like young kids, specifically between 1 and 6, in my opinion, are the manifestation of what God really is, because they, regardless of race, gender, and other intersections, they don't care about anything. They just want to love, and they don't have these, like they just know how to just be. And I think until they're socialized and tainted, that's when all these other things come into play that kind of dilutes the way of thinking and the way how to just be human and interact. So I think I really challenge folks to be the author of their own thoughts, challenge everything, and then really be able to pinpoint like what's really happening and what's in front of them, and then how do we create different solutions and do that in a unified way.
The idea of being the author of your own thoughts, that leads right into my next question, right? We're talking about an intense political moment right now. Everything about the past few years has been extremely intense. And most recently, President Donald Trump suggested that the US government fund quote unquote patriotic education and teach people about the quote unquote real history of our country. What do you make of this statement, and how does this inspire your work as it stands right now?
Can you repeat the statement again, please?
Yes, absolutely. So President Trump recently suggested that the US government fund quote unquote patriotic education and teach people about the real history of our country. So what do you make of this statement and how does it inspire your work?
I I have a lot of thoughts, but you know, when I first read and heard that, for me it was appalling but not shocking. But at the same time, like, to be real, we already have an educational system that is patriotic, that is white supremacist, that is anti-black, that is anti-immigrant, that's anti-poor. That's already kind of where we're at. I think when I hear that, it's kind of a deepened commitment to really take, like, really chip at the progress that folks like ourselves have made in the educational sector. I think for me, it's not just a question of like diversifying efforts, right? And I know in the last panel conversation, I really resonated with this idea of like diversifying efforts are not going to be enough, right? We know this is like a neoliberal liberal tactic, but really, like, as you know, as I've heard in Wisconsin and Florida and in states across the country, we are having an attack on public education, right? This is one of the really last common goods left for our communities, and it's being completely decimated. So when I hear these things by the Trump administration, I think for me, it sort of signals that that the education fight is one that is urgent, and that I think the work that we do, you know, it's an uphill battle, but it's kind of like, okay, it's time to continue to put on our long haul uniform, because this, you know, this is not just Trump. We didn't just start doing this work because of Donald Trump, but it seems like there's a serious commitment from this administration to really turn education into just a private market good, that is just traded like a, you know, like a stock exchange, and they do whatever they want with it, including making the education curriculum just neo-fascist.
I would also add too that we have to be honest with ourselves and think about the ways that even public education has contributed to this. People often don't know that Indigenous people and that Indigenous young children were sent to boarding schools, were, you know, basically forced to assimilate, and, you know, like they had their hair cut and all these kinds of things. So public education has also done a lot of damage to Black, Indigenous, children of color. So we have to start there. When I think about my own experience in public education, which elementary was the best schooling experience for me, but I very clearly remember learning about Christopher Columbus and even the language that we would use. In Spanish, he was called a conquistador, which conquistador means that somebody like charmed you, right, into doing something. And I don't think Christopher Columbus charmed anybody into giving up their country, you know. We often don't tell the actual history. So the fact that he's sitting here and saying we have to teach or have to fund patriotic education or whatnot, like how much worse can we actually get? We have to be, like I said, very real with ourselves, and you know, like the bar is just way too low. So if people think that there hasn't been issues up to now, I don't think they have been paying attention then.
Right, and you talk about the long-standing battle of how this isn't something new, that there's always been this kind of tension within public education. So if we think about now in this moment, why is youth civic engagement so crucial, especially now? And how do you rally young voters and activists who may feel like they're already politically disenfranchised to work and continue to do this work, not just in this political moment, but beyond as well? I think Lamont's going to take this one.
Bravo. Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in this political moment, why is youth civic engagement so crucial? And the second part of that question is, how do you rally support from young voters who may already feel politically disenfranchised from the same sort of system and process that they're supposed to be buying into?
Yeah, I would say just one, having like an honest conversation about, again, like the moment, about what's at stake, about how do we like unify together. And I think that kind of ties into like far as folks who are disenfranchised. I think be very like blatant that like this is not the end all be all. Like voting specifically, honestly, I think it's like it's only one tool in a toolbox. And in my personal perspective, I don't think it's one for specifically for melanated people, not in the top 3 tools of like what we need to do to get where we need to go. So being honest about that, and understanding like the reality of where we are, and what's needed. And I think specifically with young folks, regardless if they're of age or not, if they're helping in this process or any process, understanding that we need an agenda. We always need a targeted agenda. I think that's one of the things when I think about Barack Obama's presidency, specifically for like melanated and Black folks, we never gave him an agenda and just had these expectations that he was going to do these things. And that's why we feel like we got duped a little bit. So I think regardless of what we do, we need to be unified and have an agenda and hold, rather, regardless of the candidate, regardless of the party, regardless of whoever it is, the agenda they have to follow the agenda. We have to hold their feet to the fire. If we don't do that, then the organizing efforts that we're doing, it's really the definition of insanity. Then if we keep doing the same process and thinking that they're going to give different results if we don't hold them accountable and then organize in a way that's accountable as well.
And Nikki, did you want to touch on this at all?
Yeah, so I'm 26, right? So my first voting was for Obama's second term, or in that moment, and I recognize that there is a difference between that sort of coming of age moment and where we're at now, or a lot of the folks we organize with are now and what they're walking into. I think with that being said, though, I think we try to emphasize practice a lot, right? Like, we're in an age of social media where everyone has a hot take. Folks have 1,000,001 views and like it goes viral online, but that is a very different thing that organizing poses, right? Organizing poses us to get educated, do the work, learn how a budget bureaucracy works, even if it's boring, even if the meetings suck. But power mapping, who has power in Miami-Dade County? How many people do we need to win, right? And it's not just like a simple equation, but being in process of all these things that being part of an organization sort of asks of you, right? I think really teaches us that, to Lamont's point, it's not an end all be all, but we know that we need people who have shared values with us across positions of power, right? Like we know that if we just have folks who flat out want nothing to do with us, won't even open the door, that we're in a bad position for our organizing terrain, right? It's not to glorify folks who maybe pretend to, but in terms of like how can we move people and what it actually means to build power beyond mobilization, like long-term organizing, long-term campaigns. I do think elections are important in that. And again, one tool, but it is important. And I think, that's why I think a lot of organizers who've been in this work for a long time are encouraging people to engage in the electoral process this time. Yeah, there's 1,000,001 things to be said. I don't think, I think the whole point of the other swing voter is so relevant, right? We see that the mainstream camps right now have not catered to the people we're talking about, right? And that's a separate conversation, but important nonetheless.
Absolutely. And now we're taking everything that we've talked about now, and now the audience has a chance to ask us questions for Q&A. And we already have a couple that I'm going to throw out to you all. All 3 of you can answer, one person can answer. Either way, let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A with the first question of how do we support folks that feel so defeated right now that they think that they can't even vote or that voting won't help in this process?
I can start. I can't vote myself. But I have been involved in youth organizing for a couple years now, and I have seen all the great things that young people have been able to do when you invest in them from a very young age, when you treat them as leaders and help them actually see themselves as leaders. And then again, too, like when people think about the word civic engagement, a lot of people think it's just like voting, right? Which is not the case at all. Many of Lit's successes have been achieved in majority thanks to young people who aren't eligible to vote yet. And they did it through advocacy, through being very persistent and resilient and courageous as well. When I think about our like very first year in existence, and when we launched our From Failure to Freedom report and came out with a youth power agenda, which to many people seemed very bold and still seems very bold. People thought we were crazy, but young people, you know, because they were the ones experiencing the issue, they were like very adamant about it, and they wouldn't let it go. And you know, we had a lot of trials and tribulations or whatever, but young people like did not give up. They went to several school board meetings, they testified, they held individual meetings with school board members, they held direct actions. Like they did so much work, and their work came to fruition when we were able to end the remaining contracts between Milwaukee Police Department and Milwaukee Public Schools earlier this summer. And like I said, it's all young people who can't even vote right now. So if, you know, if they were able to do that, I think like that should encourage other young people to really see themselves as more powerful than people have told them they are.
Nikki, Lamont, do you want to touch on this question?
Yeah, I think first off, recognizing that despair in this moment is a very natural and very human response to what we're going through, right? Like I also feel that even in my organizing work. And I think we need to have some space for that, right? A lot of us are mourning and grieving and have experienced fundamental shifts to our life. I mean, all of us, right? So I think first off, that makes sense. I think now moving forward from that, I do think like, you know, even the work that Lit has done, like we are in a rupture moment historically. And the sort of veil of American exceptionalism has been veiled, right? Even for everyday folks and for folks that wanted to like believe in the American dream and all these things, which means like we're in a deep state of crisis. And I believe like historically crisis has deep opportunity. You know, the timing, it's on an election year. I don't think that feeling defeated is going to help us win long term. I think when people like us feel defeated, a lot of folks, our enemies, thrive. And I try to take all of that and all the nuance and all the contradictions, but I think we're in a really, really, really historical moment where there's a battle of ideas and there's a lot of opportunities, you know, because like Lit, y'all didn't start this Invest Divest campaign today, right, or this year. But because of what has happened this year, y'all were able to accelerate and win. And I think there's going to be a lot of that for us in the coming years if we're able to win electorally in some capacities.
And taking it to, you know, electorally, we're speaking, a lot of people have questions about this current presidential election that we have and thinking about how do you vote or how do you encourage people to vote? And in particular, we have one person that wants to know, they have friends that are very adamant about not voting for Joe Biden and friends who are committed to not voting for Joe Biden and friends who are committed to not voting at all in this election. So what are some methods to encourage people to vote or to organize or mobilize within their communities? And whether it's not in support of Joe Biden or if it is in support of Joe Biden, what are ways that people can encourage people to stay politically active in this moment?
I'll just start really quickly because I actually was one of those people. And I've been moved throughout the summer and throughout the year. And it's a little ironic because I do electoral work. I think a few things. I like to think of elections as thermometers, right? They're meters letting us know where we at. I think after what we saw in the primaries earlier this year, it was a sort of like big reminder that the progressive camp and politically has still not built enough of a majority base to win. And I think that was a hard reality, and we can blame it on a lot of things, and there was many things to point at. But at the end of the day, we did not win. I think that was a hard reality. COVID kicked in. And I think the position of saying someone like, I'm not gonna vote for Joe Biden, I'm not gonna engage in a process that's white supremacist and all these things, is valid to some degree. I think now the question is, we have to assess where we at. I think, I'll speak for myself. Earlier in the year, I was of those people, because that's a tactic that organizers have used to push a particular camp, in this case, the Joe Biden camp, more to actually cater to progressive folks, right? We really haven't seen much of that happen. Now is not going to be the time where the camp is going to respond. It is almost October. We're almost a month from elections. And now I think it's really the question of, if people are going to make the decision to abstain from the process, what is their sort of contribution into this liberatory pursuit? I think the danger is, again, in this age of social media and everyone with hot takes, it sounds good and might feel good to say that, but a lot of these folks are not even rooted in political organizations, and I think that's dangerous. I think if you're a person who's like, I'm simply abstaining and I'm just not grounded in any sort of political organizing work, I hate to say it, but we have never seen that historically work.
And a follow-up question to you, Nikki. You mentioned social media activism. What is its function in this current election and beyond? And this goes to all three of you, because we all know that social media and this hot take haver is a really popular trope that we're seeing right now. So how do we take that social media activism and leverage it into something that is very productive? I think Lamont, you have this one.
Okay, cool. All right. I was sure, I thought you said follow up. I think at least from what I've seen with Lit, and just in general, I think most of the folks that we target, this social media is what they use. But I think really making sure we're incorporating their voice, incorporating their ingenuity, incorporating all of their being into how we are outreaching through social media avenues. Because they, again, similar to when we talked about the issues, they're the ones experiencing the issues, just like they're the main ones using social media. So they know what works best, what's going to attract folks, far as messaging, far as little sound bites, all those different things. And that all goes away as far as how do we strategize to get people to the polls, but also use that as leverage after November as well. When we think about year-round civic engagement, even leading up to the election, prior to that, and then after, how do we utilize social media and our other avenues of organizing to keep folks involved year-round? Because again, voting is just one piece, and it comes around every other year, every 4 years, depending on your state, and every year in some aspect on a local level. But understanding the issues and the experiences go much deeper than the polls. So we need to be organizing year-round and utilizing every aspect and every pocket of our people to be able to move in a way that helps us.
The only thing I want to add to that is that we need to remind people too that there are way more people on that ballot to vote for than the presidents. Back in April, we had a really important election, and there was going to be a referendum to increase funding for our public school district. And so we did, a lot of work around that and made sure people understood, the impact of it, how important it was to students in Milwaukee public schools and whatnot. And despite all the barriers and challenges, and even the news or the decision from our state Supreme Court the night before, there was an overwhelming support for this referendum. So, people weren't necessarily deciding on a president, but there was other really important things on that ballot that were going to have a direct impact at a local level, which is super important. And I think we often neglect local elections, and there are people who win their seats with just dozens or a couple hundred votes, and that's ridiculous.
And on this last question, I'd like for all three of you to offer some advice, some wisdom to this question. Is if somebody doesn't have a Power You or a lit within their communities, how do they organize? How do they mobilize? And how do they get this work started? Let's kick it off with Nikki.
Yes, I think about this. I didn't have a Power You when I was younger, and I always wish I did, but recognizing that that's, that infrastructure is not everywhere. I think first is making sure that there isn't a Power You or a lit, right? Sometimes organizations like ours don't have huge budgets, don't have a bunch of resources to really reach all the people that we would want to. So first, making sure that there isn't like a youth radical organization in your neighborhood or in your community. And I do think there's always this question of like, you have to start somewhere, right? Like someone had to decide to start lit. Someone had to decide to start Power You. And recognizing that this is slow work, but having organizations like these is extremely important, right? Like actually having a political home, actually having somewhere where you can build relationships with folks who are like-minded or who've experienced the same things that you have, and also gaining the tools of political education and history, and also like contending and fighting for liberation, even at a local level. Like all these beautiful things that movement offers you, even within the hardships, I do think it's worth it, right? If you don't have it, build it. And I know, and I'm confident that folks in our community, like we've always historically done that. So I know sometimes that seems a little daunting, especially again in the age of social media, where it's just easier to like, repost, retweet things. That is very different than building an organization, but it's also something that we are inherently capable of and deserving of.
Let's take it to Lamont. How do people do it? How do people organize, mobilize, and keep it going and get the work started?
Yeah, I think if it's not an organization like Power You or Lit that you can get involved with, I think sometimes it really just starts with you, and starting like you and maybe 3-4 other people. And that's better than nothing, even though sometimes small numbers don't seem like that, but just starting somewhere, because that may manifest into a Lit or a Power You as the work, and people gravitate to your work and what you're doing. So I think just having the courage to step out there and do and just organize is one. I think the other piece, again, is like actually analyzing and observing like what's going on in my community and what's the need. And then I think in tandem with that is going back to what I said as far as like being the author of your own thoughts again, because if you're not the author, then somebody else is the architect of your reality. So how can I and other folks who have the same agenda as me, how can we be the architect of our reality, and then as a unit be able to be architects and build something that's like unimaginable, something that's big, that's bigger, and has a bigger vision, it has a real future. I think that's like, once you start there, I think things become a little bit easier. And I think the last one out before passing on is just like really breaking out of the individualism and like being able to unify. Like I know in this game, I always say like the political game is just be honest, worse than the crack game, because it's dirty. It can be dirty depending on who you're with, what's your agenda and what you're trying to get to. And of course, everybody wants to be propped up, but understanding it's more than you, it's bigger than you. And like, you can't lead people if you can't feed people. So understanding like everybody needs to eat. So that would be my thoughts.
I don't know how to top that. Yeah, I would just, emphasize like the need to be humble and have genuine intentions too, because unfortunately, I do see a lot of people in this work that are simply opportunists, and it's very, very unfortunate. And it obviously does no good to the movement. So you have to want a better future, a better reality for generations that are coming after you, because let's be real, a lot of us are not going to reap the benefits of the work that we're doing right now. But it's okay, right? Because before us, our older generations also had it worse, and they did a lot of work for us to be where we are right now. When I think about the issue of deferred action, I was a kid when the movement was, taking place, and it was like a decade-long movement. And when deferred action finally passed after pressuring the Obama administration so much, the people who most work for this didn't even benefit from it, and it sucks. So yeah, like, be humble, know why you're doing it, be open-minded, and don't take things personal.
Thank you all so much. This has been so insightful and encouraging, and I am inspired by the work that you all do in your community. So thank you for taking the time and contributing to this afternoon of political education. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Cool. All right, so now we are going to be transitioning for the next 15 minutes. We will engage in a series of intentional reflection. And I have a series of questions that I'll pose for us all to sit on for the next 15 minutes. The questions are, what should our democracy look like in 10 to 20 years? How do you envision your local community in 10 to 20 years? What are the ideals, values, and pillars of the future you want to see? What are the top priority issues that need to be addressed today? How do we align with other oppressed people in the world while also paying attention to our own particular circumstances? The freedom struggle is global. Is there an intentional youth-led political movement that you find inspirational? How could American democracy better reach out and address the needs of immigrants of color?
Welcome everyone to Electoral Organizing in 2020, Strategies, Challenges, and Opportunities. My name is Christelle Prophet, and I'm the Movement Building Associate at Demos and the moderator of this panel. During the session, there's going to be a 25-minute conversation focused on all of the different factors that affect political mobilization in this election cycle. For the remaining 15 minutes, I'll open up the panel for questions from our lovely Zoom audience. So please feel free to share any questions in the chat along the way. I'm joined by our amazing panelists, Nancy Mateer, an environmental activist based in Florida, and Ben Chen, Deputy Director of Maine People's Alliance. So, hi Nancy, hi Ben. I'm gonna pass it over to the both of you to quickly say a little something about yourselves, starting with Ben.
Yeah, hey Christelle, Nancy, and everybody here. Just so excited by this whole day and all the smart, talented folks who are around. And I've been community organizing up in Maine at Maine People's Alliance, a 32,000 member community organization for a number of years on a lot of different issues. And I've been engaging in electoral politics sort of throughout that.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to share a space with Ben and Christelle and all of you all today. I've been listening in on this amazing discussions, all the discussions I've been having throughout the day. And I'm not only intrigued, but ready to get folks out to vote, the swing voters. So my name is Nancy Mateer, and I am an environmentalist, a scientist. And one of my key missions is to incorporate how we talk about climate change in politics and how we can relate it to those swing voters or the folks who feel like their vote doesn't count, because we know the science shows that majority of the folks who are impacted by climate change who carry the burden of climate change and environmental impacts are communities of color. And those are the ones who tend to believe that their votes don't matter. So today I'm ready to discuss what some of those challenges are and how we convince folks to get out to vote.
All right, and thank you both so much for sharing. Quick appreciations to the both of you for giving the time for participating on this panel, and quick thank you to the audience. And that's it, so let's get started. So my first question is based in everything that's going on right now. COVID-19 has upended all of our lives at what seems to be the worst moment possible, an election year. So what are some challenges that you've faced in your organizing, and what are some things that you're currently experiencing as everybody's living through a pandemic?
I don't mind going this.
Oh, go ahead.
So folks are zoomed out. That is what I've been experiencing. Folks are, because we're home, organizations or individuals feel like you can hop on Zooms back to back and folks are tired, right? So that's one challenge. Another challenge is a language barrier. I work heavily in the Haitian community, and it's always tooth and nail to get organizations or elected officials or to get information translated in Haitian Creole. It's always an afterthought. And this community is always engaged at the very tail end in any type of campaign. And so that has been a challenge pre-COVID, but when we talk about COVID now and the folks that we're trying to reach, some of them are not technology savvy. So getting them on a virtual event is really hard. And not being able to meet them where they're at. So like previously before, community meetings was the norm, and then we can bribe folks with food. That's how I was able to engage more folks. I would love to break bread with individuals, and that's how great conversations would happen. But now what we're seeing is the language barrier. Older folks are afraid to leave their homes. We have individuals who feel, frankly, their voice doesn't matter whether or not they're engaged or not engaged. There's this narrative out there now, especially around the census, as we're trying to get folks to complete the census, and we're saying, hey, you count the census, you get more representation on Congress, et cetera. And they're like, why does it matter? Like, my issues aren't at the center of these conversations, so I'm not gonna get involved. So it's a lot harder to reach people when you can't see them face to face, and trying to wheeling them in virtually is another challenge. But what we found was that could be very helpful are videos, 30-second videos, and seeing breakdowns, graphics with reminder dates. And that's easy to translate, and sending throughout WhatsApp. In the community I work in, WhatsApp is like your average CNN or NBC News, right? That's where people get their information from. So being able to circulate that information to the networks or the social media outlets that they're involved in has been helpful. There's also has been a lot of verses going on, or a lot of battles, musical battles. So myself, my team, the folks that we organize with, we actually drop important information in those chats, and people actually engage with us, right? Hey, don't forget to complete your census. Hey, don't forget to register to vote. And kind of feeds into the momentum in the chat, and have a good time with it. So really just meeting folks where they're at.
Yeah, I really agree with all of that. And I'd add too that I think when I look back at the last 6 months at what we've been able to accomplish and where we've stumbled and what we still have to get across the finish line on, I'm really struck by how much the cumulative stress that people have experienced has just fundamentally altered people's perspectives and attitudes and just basic ability to do work. I think that most of the time that I've spent actually dealing with COVID, like I feel like we're adapting to not being able to canvas, and we're starting to figure out the tactical things, but all of that really depends on people's lives being stable enough where they can actually say, hey, I want to do a project. I'm going to plan it out. I'm going to go talk to a bunch of people, do some meetings, and consistently work on it week to week. And, if your life is upended by whether it's a healthcare crisis or direct economic insecurity, or just the fact that you've got to take care of kids, or you're really isolated, or whatever, it just makes it that much harder to deal with all the unpredictable, hard things about working on an electoral campaign or really anything else. So I think that going into this, I used to think, the little things that were sort of foreign to campaign culture, like, oh, get good sleep, eat nutritious food, don't just live on pizza. Those things always used to be just like, oh, nice things that get put in like the self-care bucket, as if that was sort of separate. And now what I'm really seeing is like the people who are able to take a little bit of time to exercise and eat a little bit and make sure they're covering those basics and like have good, strong, loving relationships and family support. Like those are the folks who are able to really be out there working right now. And for folks who are struggling with that, it's really on us to make sure that we're lifting them up and giving them the support and love and care they need in this moment to be able to do this work.
Thank you both for sharing. So Nancy, you mentioned about working with older folks in your community. Can you speak a little bit toward the younger people that you've been working with as well?
Yeah, so with our younger folks, we've been able to engage them on social media and again, versus, and that has been a way for us to target them a little bit better. It is so, it's so exciting to hear individuals saying, hey, it's my first year that I can run, I can vote. Where can I submit my ballot? When is my deadline? How do I get more involved? But it's also disheartening when you hear young folks say, it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't matter. And when we hear about what's going on in Florida, that's where I currently am, around folks really using the BLM movement to really alter folks' narratives around what that movement is truly about. And really it's discouraging. Folks feel like at this particular time, this is just a moment, not a movement. And our young folks are tired. They are tired of continuously speaking up and speaking out and not being heard. So one of our challenges is really to ensure that we're giving, one of our challenges is really ensuring that they're being heard, but one of the pros is giving them the resources for them to feel empowered. whether that is Civic Engagement 101, Avancé Ensemble, which I help organize with, has done one-on-one civic engagement series, and it's really breaking down civics one-on-one in layman's terms, right? When do you organize, when do you register? Who's on your ballot? Why are these elected officials important? Where can they get more information? How to do their own research? Again, we don't tell them who to vote for. We're just telling you the significance of these various roles. And when we break that down, when we break that information down, we see more and more individuals who are eager to learn more. So I think as a community, as organizations continue to build out, that we need to continue doing these civic one-on-ones in layman's terms, because we can get lost with using strategizing and political strategists and X, Y, and Z is your win number. Like, all of that gets confusing. And when you're able to break it down in a way that is palatable, I think we can bring more people to the conversation.
I'd really echo that. And I think one of the things that's implicit in what Nancy's talking about there that's maybe worth underscoring is the difference between TV ads and relationships. Because I think a lot of people are trying to solve this problem by saying like, oh, well, maybe if we just use the right 6 words and a little soundbite and a flashy image or, a graphic on Facebook, like that'll do it. And I know for me, for the people I'm talking to, we're all getting called, we're all getting texted, we're like, every time I turn the TV, there's another ad. And the only thing that really breaks through in that moment are like actual people who that are going to talk with you around the things that Nancy was just laying out. And I think that for a lot of campaigns that just rely on spending a lot of money real late, just blasting people with one-way communication, that's not good. And the things that are working right now are the organizations and the relationships that are going to be there with people having credibility year in and year out, because we're not going to just go away after election day. We're in it for the long haul, working on actually changing the conditions on the ground, not just getting folks elected and see you next election. So I feel like in some ways that's like a less satisfying answer because it requires doing hard long-term work. But the only time you can start hard long-term work is right now in this moment. And this is a good time to make those investments.
So you both have mentioned the importance of the campaign work, holding yourself toward restorative justice and trying to take care of yourself through the process. So holding that, holding that, how do you think that we can manage all of the different things that are happening, as well as shifting the narrative to motivate younger people, to engage them and move them towards state and local elections over the national elections?
Nancy, you got a direct interest in this, so I feel like you should take that one first.
Okay, I just don't want to take up too much space. So I submitted a graphic to you all earlier, and I really want to use this as a talking point. So I mentioned earlier, like, this is not a moment, it's a movement. And if anyone here lives in Florida or organizes in Florida, you will know that it is a hot mess, right? When it comes to getting our folks out to vote, because I feel like our government purposely, our state government purposely tries to suppress votes, right? Whether that is overwhelmingly pushing out an amendment that we voted into in 2018, Amendment 4 passed, where we would give returning citizens their rights back to vote. Well, as late as September, earlier this month, our courts actually reversed our lower courts, saying that you identifying what completing your sentences is, that you have to ensure that all of your fines have been paid for. So we are looking at 1.5 million individuals who were previously eligible to vote, but they can't vote now. So that is disheartening because we ran or we pushed campaigns targeted to young people who were in this category of returning citizens. Hey, you have the right to vote now. Don't take this for granted. You have a second chance. And now that's being pulled away from them. So when we talk to young folks, when I talk to young folks, it's a matter of they feel defeated, right? And so the pivot to that is, do you have that graphic, Christelle?
Yes, we're working on it with ActTV.
Okay, perfect. So continuing, our governor just passed a bill stating that if anybody would assemble, we would be assembled, we would be marching around Black lives, it would be, you would be incriminated for that. So with that particular slide, it's called Combating Violence, Disorder, and Looting and Law Enforcement Protection Act. So we all know that we are not marching because of the sake of marching. We're marching because we are deliberately saying that Black lives don't matter, have not mattered to law enforcement, have not mattered to pretty much anyone who continues to disenfranchise and oppress communities of color. The first portion of this bill says new criminal offenses of combating rioting, looting, and violence. You are prohibited of disorderly assemblies. So it's a direct attack on your Second Amendment. So you're basically saying I cannot march in Florida. This has not passed yet, but this is a bill up in legislation. So if you have a assembly of 10,000 plus individuals who are marching peacefully and one person loots or drives into your assembly and causes chaos, the people who organized it are liable and they go to jail, right? They also get RICO liability, which labels them as a gang member. It prohibits obstructing roadways, meaning what MLK did in Selma and John Lewis. Those were acts of defiance, but we always look to them as, hey, let's be more like them. The good trouble, well, Florida is telling you what they did is wrong and you shouldn't do it either, and you will go to jail. It also says drivers are not liable for injury or death if they drive into an assembly. So they use stand your ground, and physical attacks on protesters are acknowledged from an opposite group. The second portion of this graphic when it comes up is increased penalties. So you have increased jail time, offense enhancements. And then if you are trying to mobilize around defunding the police, which we all know has gotten a lot of negative narration around it. We all know that defunding police does not mean abolishing police. It means reallocating funds away from police departments that rely heavily on funds for weapons, but instead we're asking them to really pour into social services like mental health, like education, like community programming. DeSantis is saying that it prohibits defund police permitted. So that means that you are unable to do that. And if you are part of that and you're in a government employee or benefits and you're saying defund the police and you're around that rhetoric, you will lose your government employment and benefits. That means teachers will lose their job if they participate and their pensions. And then you will get no bond. But that still allows attempted murderers, rapists, and child porn to still be allocated bonds if they decide, they're still allowed bonds, but folks who are pushing for defund police aren't. So we are a hot mess in Florida, and really mobilizing particularly around this bill and the rights restoration really have mobilized young people to get more involved, because they understand that it directly impacts them, and they can see the direct correlation between how their abilities and their voices are being suppressed.
Yeah, well, one of the that's such an amazing summary. And Nancy, I really, following Florida in the news, that sounds like such an important work in a really hard environment. One of the things that I was reflecting on as you were sharing that was how many similarities there are between all of the state and local issues that we're working on. Because on the one hand, right, all of the violence against Black communities of color is a national issue. But on the other hand, so much of the levers of power that we need to pull to change that are really, really local, like right down the street local, in terms of who actually needs to be held accountable. And and so in Maine right now, we had this summer, and I think we're still holding this record for some of the worst COVID-19 disparities in terms of racial disparities in the country. And on the one hand, it's like a global issue, right? But then when you start trying to figure out, well, what do we need to do to change that? Then it's, it's this local CDC person who isn't accountable to anybody. And they're just some bureaucrat that's been stuck in an office that hasn't actually talked to anybody in the community, has no idea what's going on the ground. And any time that we can take a voter and just give them a little bit of a taste on what it's like to talk to somebody who lives so nearby them and has so much influence and so much power over what's happening on the ground, and see, wow, like you actually don't have to be an expert in anything more than your own personal experience in terms of how this is affecting you to really meaningfully change this person's mind about something, leverage new resources, change policies. And by the way, like the people that person's accountable to, like they're on the ballot this year. And it might be a little bit of a stretch to think, oh, well, how is, your one vote, your voice going to make an impact in the overall electoral college, which it certainly will. But at the same time, just looking at like this state representative, they're only going to win their election by a few thousand, maybe only a few hundred votes. And, what if you were able to raise your voice on that issue, connecting all those dots. So, I actually think in general, national politics is what most people sort of have front of mind, and it's the easiest way to start a conversation. But in terms of crossing that hump for what's going to make somebody want to come back and vote over and over again and really become a lifelong voter and really participate in the process, I actually think state and local stuff is really a little bit more where that action happens, because that's where people can just immediately see their impact and have that feedback coming right back.
Thank you, Ben and Nancy. So following along on this thread, do you have any tactics or strategies or ideas for keeping folks engaged even after the general election through to the midterm and in any possible local elections that folks need to be wary of?
So what we've been doing to continue keeping folks engaged, I know through Avancing Some, what we've done is we've actually blended cultural conversations into keeping folks engaged. So we have like cooking classes as well as language classes, and then we'll drop in some civic engagement knowledge in between that. So folks are just like, they don't realize that like what we're doing is keeping them engaged and keeping them up to date about what's going on locally, but they see it as a way to fellowship. So really to manage, my suggestion of keeping folks engaged after the national elections, local elections, is to not stop having those conversations. What we tend to do is the last 6 months of an election cycle, that's when we tap these groups or these communities, but we fail to keep them engaged 4 years before, 2 years before, and really stressing how important midterm elections are, right? Our governor's races, like elections have consequences, and reminding folks what's going on in Florida now is because we didn't do our job to ensure that folks were engaged and had the knowledge to be, to get out to the polls in 2018. And if they did, they probably didn't know how to properly fill out their ballots, their signatures didn't match, like all of the things that our state does to ensure that our votes don't count. So right now, I think we're learning from that mistake in 2018 because we're still healing from it, because COVID and our state opening up prematurely and a mess. It is a mess in Florida. So what my suggestion is to everyone is to not stop having those conversations, to really incorporate civic engagement or education components with things that people like to do. Add music to it. Again, add a video, make it appealing, make it so that people want to know more. And never dismiss the power of having a one-on-one conversation. Let's have a wind down. Like we've done that so many times where we just talk about what's going on through a glass of wine virtually. People just take advantage, disregard just the one-on-one communication skills.
I really like that, and I think on the one-on-one communication skills, I think there can sometimes be a spectrum where like some people come to this work and they are super rooted in their communities, long-standing ties. They know everybody at their church, they know everybody at their kids' school, and they're just tons of relationships. I think for folks on that side of the spectrum, it's a question of how can you actually translate those relationships and build that into something that really lasts and will still be around and actually even be launching on November 4th. And then other folks, I think, are just starting to get involved in this and could be new to an area or young and just kind of get into politics, and they're trying to build relationships. And for that, I would say the one thing I've definitely been talking to folks on our organizing team about is how can we not just do all the mass voter contact, but actually have people build some group identity, and just like, instead of just going out to phone bank it, have a little bit of a meeting, get your top people together and generate some creative ideas and build a little bit of a community. And right now put on the books, hey, on November 4th, on November 10th, whatever, this is the meeting that we're going to do where we're going to debrief all of this. We're going to figure out what comes next, because nothing is going to be accomplished just by the election. Everything that matters happens as a consequence of the election afterwards. And so that game just keeps going. And so whatever brought you to care about, the election, like that is just beginning. And so what is the next thing that you want to get in the books for your community meeting with and mobilizing around after election day?
And if I can add just a little bit to what Ben said, like I agree 110%. Yesterday, I was watching the presidential debate, and there was a lot of back and forth on social media. And one comment that struck out to me, like that pierced in my heart, was, okay, this is all important. It's all relevant. It's important that we get folks out to vote. But how do we translate this to someone who's unemployed since March and needs solutions well before anyone is sworn into office, right? We are not reaching those people. These individuals are hungry. These individuals need to figure out how they're going to survive. So until we start figuring out how we give these folks tangible solutions and really connect the dots, I'm like, okay, you're impacted because of this. This is why you're unemployed. Like really showing those consequences, folks don't care. Folks are not going to care, and they're going to continue not to continue to care because they're distracted. They need to eat. They need to go to work. They need to provide for their families. And so I think really to really engage folks, to get them out to vote, we really need to meet them where they're at and really ensure that they understand why these elections impact them this way.
Thank you for ending the conversation on that really powerful note. So we're going to pivot into our question and answer round right now. So folks in the audience, please remember to use the chat function to share any questions that you have for Ben or Nancy. So we have about 15 minutes left. And while people are taking time to think, I'll get us started with a different kind of question. So this is to both of you. what has helped you start off in getting as politically involved as you are? And what advice do you have for others who want to set off in a similar direction?
I can go first on this one. I'll just offer that when I look back on, kind of what got me involved, I'd like to say that it was a lot about me and, getting political and connecting dots and all that. But really, I think when I look back, I think of really particular people, Jake and Kate and just some of these other names that just when they come to my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, wow. I really didn't know very much about any of the issues, how to get involved, what was strategic, what wasn't. And it was just people investing in me that I really trusted and liked and frankly just wanted to imitate and be like that was what got it in for me. And so when I try to think now about, what to learn from that and take away, I really think about can I point to this week anybody who I am credibly saying it's wow, this is a new person who I'm excited about, who I really want to invest in and pay that forward. And I think, conversely, if you're just getting started out right now in 2020, it's obviously a historic time to be doing that. And I would just not worry at all about what you don't know, because all that stuff comes with just doing it. And I think the key thing is to just figure out who are the people who you really trust and like and respect and love, and just follow them and do what they're doing. And over time, it just changes so quickly. Just a few months doing some activism and really, a whole life trajectory can be changed for you and those around you. So just finding quality people, I'd say.
Ben, I echo all of that. I definitely loved the individuals who poured into me and told me you definitely should be in politics. You are a breath of fresh air. But what I realized is all of those people who were telling me that looked nothing like me, right? It was older white men, older white women, no Black women, no young people. And I said, that is something that I wanted to directly change, right? You can't be something that you've never seen. And as I engage with young girls, children of color, young people of color, they always say, wow, one, I've never met a Black scientist, or, oh, I've never met someone doing this work before. And to me, that says a lot. I entered activism after the cholera pandemic in Haiti and realized an organization that held human rights to a standard, held it, said, you need to do this correctly by people, refused to take accountability for bringing cholera to Haiti. And that to me said, I needed to do something when it comes to not only holding folks accountable, but really holding people to what they say that they're supposed to do. And so that's when I finally entered this space and said, I am a voice. Folks need to be represented. Folks who look like me need to be represented. Folks who speak the same language as me need to be represented, because when we have different perspectives, our democracy, we see it, flourishes, right? And so that's what keeps me going and keeps me in this space, knowing that we need more inclusivity. We need to hold our democracy to the standards that it said that it was created on. And second, just when it's time to say, hey, you're wrong, I want to be able to articulate that well enough by changing policies to say, this is why you're wrong, and we need to implement policies this way to ensure that the folks who felt that they didn't have their voices heard are now at the table creating that change.
Ben, you made an earlier point about creating group identity. So can you speak a little bit more about that, around how you've created a political group identity across race and class and generations?
Okay, so there's no magic answer there. I mean, I could talk about some things that we've tried. One of the things that I think is a little bit underrated is, well, okay, and I'll say this too. It's like, I think oftentimes when people want to find a way into this, their first instinct is in training. And I think we were talking a little bit about diversity training, that kind of stuff in the first session. And I would actually say, to me, training is like second, third, or fourth on the list in terms of trying to cross some of those barriers. For me, the most powerful things that have helped people build community and group identity across all those different lines has been actually finding things for people to do. And then in the old days, we used to have carpools and, stuff like that. So it's a little bit harder now that so many things are remote, but having shared experiences, I think is the core of this. I think there was a study once done about, why do people make such meaningful lifelong friendships with folks they went to like summer camp with? And the answer they came up with is that it's basically like, if you have a shared and very intense experience with somebody, that really it creates bonds like nothing else. And everything about activism and elections is really unique and bizarre and weird and also very intense. And so just that act of really engaging in some kind of shared action. And then, on Zoom, it's like, if you can just take 5 minutes after and say, it's like, okay, great. Like we hit our goals, we hit our numbers, we phone bank, we text party, we did all that, but we're just going to talk about it for 5 minutes. And we're just going to share a couple funny stories. And, this person was really mean to me and that was sad. And here's how I did to come back, just those little things of creating that little bond, that little relationship. I think that goes a long way, because eventually after you do that a couple times, then people are like, oh, hey, you've got a pretty different life experience than me. And I'm kind of interested in that. Maybe I'm going to ask a question about that. And maybe I've got enough trust that I'm going to share something on my own with you. And then you start to like really bridge those gaps meaningfully. I think after that happens, then you can kind of come in and do those trainings where you can sort of really start unpacking all the deep things that are behind those differences. But I think leading with figuring out what are the shared experiences that you can kind of construct. And I would say, if you're running an electoral program, it's almost better to think about in terms of that, like, how do we create really meaningful experiences for folks that meet each other? Because if you do that, all the other stuff kind of flows from there.
Thank you. Nancy, did you have anything to add to that around group identity, or if not, I could just move on to the next question.
No, I didn't. Ben covered it.
Nice. Thank you. So one question from the audience is, if you could say something to young voters and organizers or people who aspire to organize, what would you say to them? And that's for both of you.
That is heavy. First and foremost, I would say be your authentic self. You just showing up in a space the way you are adds to the conversation. And for you to go out and organize, it's a hard job. You don't get paid much. So you really have to love what you're doing and find a mentor in this space. Find someone who's been doing this work for a long time. They can teach you what they've learned, and then you can revamp it to make it your own. For those who are thinking about organizing and how to get more involved, volunteer with the Sierra Club, volunteer with different organizations that align with your core values. Because what organizing is, it's something that you're passionate about. If you're not passionate with the job or the campaign or the issue you're working on, you will not be an effective organizer, because your sole job is to get community members excited about whatever issue or campaign that you're working on. So that is my advice to you. And I can't stress enough building relationships, because organizing is all about relationships. It's about knowing folks. It's about figuring out how to get this particular campaign completed in getting the results that you want. And that's based on the relationships with people.
I agree with all of that. I might also add too that I wish somebody had told me that, well, you absolutely have to get focused on winning things, right? Because if we're not improving folks' lives and working together to do that, what's the point of all this? There actually isn't such a thing as losing, so long as you never give up. Because anybody who's been in this game for a minute knows, unless you're just not really trying to do hard things, which in case you're probably not trying to do meaningful things, you're gonna lose and probably lose quite a bit. But nothing's ever permanent. So it doesn't matter, you'll have setbacks, and the difference between a loss and a setback is just, are you gonna keep going? Are you gonna be persistent or not? Because in the long story of life, and particularly, if you're young and you're starting out, you got time, right? That's like the biggest resource. So set really ambitious goals that you're not sure that you can hit off right away, but work towards them, because anything that goes wrong in that process, so long as you're committed to being persistent, that's just a learning opportunity. That's just a way to up your game, figure things out, and come back bigger and better and stronger and smarter the next time. And so, yeah, I think particularly for young folks, it's like very few problems get solved in 6 months ever. It's like you win you win an election, you pull off a really great protest, that's great. And you're going to probably have to do that again, 10 more times. And every time you do that, it's good. You're going to learn and get better. And it doesn't matter if you have the setbacks or failures. So long as you're learning, so long as you're improving, it's everything bad that happens is just going to fuel that fire going forwards.
All right, so we're at time. We went over a lot of material in a short time, but I want to thank Ben and Nancy for sharing their experiences, their wisdom, and just their overall greatness during the 45 minutes that we had together. So thank you both. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll be moving on to the next session. Next up, we have Paige Chapman, a meditation teacher that will lead us through intentional breath work. So please stay tuned until she's up.
All right. Alrighty, so hello and welcome to everyone who's here. Thank you so much for everyone who's participated today. There's lots and lots of amazing work that's being done. And it's beautiful to see, all of us here in community, even though virtual. So I'm going to be leading us through just a very quick meditation related to the theme of the day, which I think is around visioning forward. And so what that really means is we're kind of asking ourselves, what is our impact on the world around us? How are we envisioning ourselves in this greater collective? And we've been doing a lot of intellectual heavy lifting today, right? A lot of deep thought and deep inquiry, but I just want us to kind of take a step back from some of that. And so I'm going to invite everyone, wherever you are, however you are situated, to just take a seat. I'm on my living room floor on a cushion. If that's comfortable for you, go ahead and get on the floor. If you're in a chair, just kind of have some integrity in your spine and sit tall. But as we're seated, I'm going to start just some relaxing tones for us. And then I'm also, at the very end, I'm going to ring this little chime, just in case anybody falls asleep, because that does tend to happen when we are relaxing and spending some time with ourselves, which is perfectly fine and normal. All right, so I'm just going to set us up here. All right, so wherever you are, and if it feels comfortable to you, I'm going to invite you to just close your eyes and take a very, very deepest breath you've taken all day. Deep breath in and all the way out. And don't really worry too much about where your hands are. You can have your hands on your legs or at your side, crossed in your lap. You just take some deep breaths at your own pace. So part of what I'm going to be asking us to do is, as we're becoming acquainted with ourselves, acquainted with our seat and our environment, I want you to start extending your breaths to where you feel it in your chest. So you're really pushing out the front of your lungs. And as you do that, I'm gonna bring in some visual aids for you, just to imagine the color green. Green because the chest is a place that, when we are definitely talking about marginalized communities, where we are within our communities, we feel from our heart, we feel from our chest. And green is the color of the heart chakra, how we communicate with others as well as ourselves. So in these next breaths, I want you to imagine you are breathing in green in your chest, the richest color green that you can imagine. And as you're imagining yourself kind of surrounded by the light of green, you can be imagining a forest or a meadow. Whatever flecks and colors of green that appear for you kind of behind your eyelids, just remind yourself that that is yours. That this present moment that you're breathing right now, the energy you're breathing in and sending out, is all yours. And if you're imagining yourself in a landscape, in a forest or a field or whatever you're seeing as green, try and envision yourself walking through that landscape. And have a feeling of bringing breath into your feet as you walk. And sending this green energy, this loving energy down to your feet. And with every step, imagine the vibrations and the ripples that are being penetrated out to the world. And just think of that everything that you do, big or small, whether that's voting, community organizing, or just sitting here with us right now, that every breath and step you take is rippled out infinitely. It's an infinite ripple to the world, and it might clash with others and cross the paths of other people's ripples and energies and vibrations. But just like the green of your breath right now, all of that is yours. All right, and continuing on, let's imagine that in this landscape you come across an opening or clearing where you can look up at the sky and you see the richest and fullest blue. It's the deep and endless kind of blue. And as you do so, bring attention to your jaw and your throat, your neck. You can even run your neck in circles like this. Just loosen it up. blue, the color of the throat chakra, which is the home of our voices. And a lot of the conversation we've had today and will continue to have of using our voices in whatever way or capacity feels right and resonates with us. So now with every inhale and exhale, imagine your whole body just lighting up with that blue that you're imagining. That's your blue. And allow your jaw and throat rippling all the way down to your chest just to relax. And if in your imagination you did imagine a sky, or maybe you imagined water or a blue river, kind of envision a type of rhythm, an actual rhythm with your breath that's translating into whatever landscape you see. So keeping with this relaxed breath, wherever you are in this landscape in your imagination, as you take another deep breath, you might come across, say, a beach, or a sandbar in the river you've imagined. If you've imagined a sky, perhaps your attention is being brought to the sun. And wherever you are, just imagine you're taking a seat on the ground, kind of just laying down, and bringing that relaxation down to the rest of your body. So as you're there, you can imagine a golden yellowish tone, the color of your solar plexus chakra, which is placed behind your belly button, so in the gut, tummy area. So bring your breath into your belly, into your tummy, kind of relax that area. Again, that's another area where we are talking about politics and despair and fear and anxiety. Sometimes our tummies might flip. Sometimes we get a little tight. But without thinking about anything else, just relax into what you're seeing as gold and yellow. Breathing it in, lighting up your whole body, and then sending that emotion, that creativity that comes from the solar plexus, just send it on out. Really envision the deepest, most beautiful gold. It's yours, it's yours, it's yours. And if you've imagined sand, perhaps think about how there are as many particles or pieces of sand, grains of sand on this earth as there are stars. And that each individual grain is strong and sustainable in its own right, but in community, that sand is enough to hold the weight of not just you, but the entire world. It's warmed by a golden sun, that yellow color that we're still seeing as we breathe. If you're imagining a sun, just kind of breathe in the qualia or the feeling of warmth. Let it warm up your entire body, let it recharge from all the fatigue and all of the things that you might be otherwise thinking of. Just acknowledge your thoughts and let them pass. Now, as you kind of continue to relax, breathe deeply. Just start filling up your body as you take in some deep inhales. Just fill yourself up with some gratitude. Thank yourself for deciding to spend some time with yourself. Giving yourself some active rest. Giving yourself a break. Refeeding your mind and your energy. And kind of what you're envisioning for the world, just remember that it all starts with you. That if you breathe love or if you breathe gratitude in, that's what you breathe out, in whatever color that is. And so just take a couple more deep breaths on your own. And on these last few breaths, take the deepest ones that you've taken all day, even deeper from the ones from the start. Take your time. Breathe in a lot of light. And then let that light just reverb into the rest of the world, into the rest of your community. So that was the bell. You can go ahead and slowly, lightly flutter your eyes open. Hopefully not everybody fell asleep. Some people do. But just kind of reset yourself, reacclimate to your surroundings. And just thank yourself for investing in yourself for those past couple minutes. And I'll leave you all with just a gentle bow. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Paige, for that groundedness after a full day of, being in conversation around community relationships. It's so important that we also incorporate rest into our resistance. So we want to thank you very much for leading us through that meditation and are super duper grateful for you being here with us today and for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. So up next, we have the last panel of the day, which I'm super excited about. I am Adeline Gutierrez Nunez. I am the assistant to the director at the Center for Antiracist Research, and I will be leading and moderating this session. I am so excited, and the purpose of this session is to discuss moving from elections to community-led governance. So a lot of what we have spoken about today has been around centering relationships and our organizing efforts, especially when we think about Black and Brown young folks. So we are all ready. I want to say hi to my wonderful panelists, Sophia and Gabriela, and we are almost there with Rukia. She'll be joining us very shortly. So I want us to start by you all telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this moment. Let's start off with Gabby and then move to Sophia. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Adeline. Happy to be here. It's been a really inspiring, very grounding conversation today. So really honored to be spending some time with you all. My name is Gabriela Santiago Romero. I am currently the Policy and Research Director at We the People Michigan. I'm calling you live from Southwest Detroit. And I do this work because it's very personal to me. I remember the first time that I found out I was poor. I was in middle school and I was crying to my mom for new shoes. She said, "You don't need new shoes. You have what you need for school. You have what you need for your life." And she was right. But it was really only later in life that I realized the food at my table was picked up from a local church or food pantry. We received WIC services because we were so poor. And we had our lights on and our heat always worked because my mom worked incredibly hard to be able to pinch her pennies, to be able to give us what we need to live a life with dignity. So I do this work because I know that it shouldn't be this hard for me and my family, it shouldn't be this hard for our communities. And I'm really excited to talk about changing that for ourselves and for the people that we love and care for.
Thank you so much. And Sophia, welcome to the space. How did you arrive at where you are today?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Khalid. I am from Lewiston, Maine. I'm currently working for a nonprofit organization that serves largely immigrant youth from ages 15 to 24. I am a city councilor for the city of Lewiston, and I got elected at the age of 23, so the youngest ever city councilor and the first Somali American. And I'm very excited to be here and part of this discussion with all of you.
Well, thank you for being here so much. So part of this discussion is really, the entire day we have been talking about elections. How do you mobilize other swing voters? But, as Black and Brown folks, we also know that elections are not the end all be all and that won't, grant our liberation. So the first question that I want to start off with you all is, what is the power of elections and how should young voters view elections and how should we participate in this electoral system? And I'll start it off with you, Sophia.
Thank you for that question. Elections and just voting in general is very, very important. And unfortunately, a lot of young people don't see that, how powerful their votes can be. We had an election last year that a candidate won by 2 votes. And if those 2 people didn't show up, it would have been tied and such a headache. So it's really important to have everyone vote. And a lot of the youth that I work with are just so discouraged to vote, and especially a lot of the poor minority communities that I work with just don't think that much about voting in elections, unfortunately, because they're so focused on their current life circumstances, which is, they're struggling from a lot of the families that I work with are like 10 kids, and there's a lot of barriers in place, especially with the pandemic happening right now. It's like it's stacked up on all of us. So how do we continue to encourage young voters and minority individuals to vote, even though they are dealing with a lot in their own lives? And for me personally, how I encourage them to vote is I'm always in the community. I think it's really important to have direct conversations and real conversations with people at the doors, and phone conversations rather than sending mails or sending advertising. And also it's very important to make this work year around. A lot of corporations and people who work with elections just come into communities in election seasons, and I feel like that's not sustainable, and a lot of these communities feel like they're being exploited by their votes. And a lot of these individuals who are very election minded just don't think about how how their their organizing can be negatively impacted by these poor communities. So we really need to be very intentional with the things that we do and the things that we say.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I also want to, welcome Rukia to the space. Rukia is an executive director of the People's Advocacy Institute, and she's also the co-founder of the Electoral Justice Project. So Rukia, can you tell us a little bit about, what is the power of elections, and, how should young voters of color in particularly should view elections?
Yes. Hey, everybody. I apologize for my tardiness, but can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had to move outside to make sure that I had some stable internet. So we do all the things. So yes, I'm Rukia Lumumba. I'm with the People's Advocacy Institute, which is a hyperlocal organization that is working to be an incubator for transformative justice in the South. And so that means that what we're doing is working to dismantle systems that have historically harmed our folks and create new systems of justice. And that includes the electoral system that exists in this country. It also includes, and most of our work is focused and centered around connecting the electoral system problems with that of mass incarceration. And so we work to abolish prisons, to end mass incarceration, and create a new system of public safety that actually is about accountability, restoration from harm, and moving towards a better quality of life for all of us. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm also a part of the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives, where I have the beautiful opportunity to lead that work with Kayla Reed and Jessica Bird. And so we recently just did a Black National Convention where we were able to galvanize nearly over 1 million people and lifted a Black agenda called the Vision for Black Lives, which people can find online at m4bl.org. But when we're talking about, and I apologize, now there's an airplane flying over me. It's one of those amazing days. So, when we're talking about young people and voting and how can we engage, I think what Safia said earlier was so true, right? Around feeling only engaged at the time of an important election year. And so one of the things that we do, that we center our work around, is this idea around community-led governance that exists all year round. And so that involves really shifting our work back to that of true democracy, where we are engaging on a hyperlocal level in assemblies that allow for all participants of a community, regardless of age, regardless of nationality or citizenship, regardless of if they've been convicted of a crime in the past. It allows all of us to engage in a process of deciding what policies and practices should exist in our localities, in our cities, in our towns, in our neighborhoods. And so to that end, we should be engaging all year round, building that political infrastructure so that we can be shifted from being governed to governing, right? And I can talk a little bit more about what that really means and what an assembly looks like. But then, as we're talking about this year, so we're talking about this critical year, because every year is critical. Let's get it right. Every year is critical. But we know that it is necessary right now for us to engage. And it's necessary right now for us to engage in a hyper way, in a more active way than we have even done so in the past, to mobilize all of our folks, because we have a clear, very clear opportunity to protect lives. It's a harm reduction approach. That's what we're doing right now. We're asking folks to engage because we need to decrease the likelihood of harm that will come to more of us than if we don't. And so I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I know that, all three of you, just community and even you speaking about, community-led governance and reducing harm. I want to, start with a question, because I think sometimes we say community and we think that is just people that look like us, but what does community really mean to you? And I'll start with you, Gabby, but I want you all to answer this question.
Sure. I was trying to think through the best answer for this. And honestly, I think there's many different ways that people define community. For me, I define it as a group of people that have similar values, similar needs, similar outcomes and desires that they want to see. And to that point, you should know what communities that you're a part of and start to engage in those. I know for me, I'm a part of the immigrant community. I'm from Detroit. I'm queer. I'm a woman. Those are many communities. Those are many identities. Each who may want different things, each who may want something similar. And it's really my job to align those and to build with people in those communities. I think that's part of the biggest problem that we're facing right now is we don't actually see that communities in Detroit have very similar problems as the communities in Upper Peninsula in Michigan, rural Michigan. We are also facing housing foreclosures. We're also facing lack of proper housing, also facing lack of quality education. So not being in community, not being able to talk to folks and understanding those commonalities, I think are part of the reason why we're so divided and why we're not able to win our fights that would honestly benefit our communities across my state, across our country. And it's important, right? It's important to know who's your community, what is it that we want and what we need, and start to build with each other.
Yeah, Sophia, what are your thoughts on that? I think you captured it, very well, but if there's anything that you want to add.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Being both on the community activism side and also I see community as everyone who lives in the city of Lewiston. Even though some of them may not have voted for me, even though some of us have different party affiliation, at the end of the day, we are struggling and we are facing challenges. And those challenges and those struggles may all affect us differently. But at the end of the day, what community means to me is if we can come together and find a common ground and really talk about what solutions we can really bring out and be very civil at times. So I think like being on the organizing side, I see a lot of people from poor to not poor, from immigrant to Mainers who lived here for generations, to little kids, everyone on the spectrum. And that makes me very proud. And I'm just so happy that my community is very colorful and honestly, willing to all work together, even though we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things.
Yeah, Ruki, I'm going to extend this question to you and also, just to share a little bit more about, what does community mean, but also what is community-led governance? I know you talked a little bit about it, but I really think that, this is something that, people should be paying attention to, especially the younger generation who don't, who feel disenfranchised by the elections and by the system and really, are trying to hold on to something. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I agree with everything I've heard. And, I would just expand that too, to just say that community, when we're, in the broader sense for me, when I'm thinking of like this idea of really centering ourselves around community-led governance and true democracy, it means residents of a particular place. It means literally the residents of a particular place and how we are able to communicate and create decision-making processes and then reach consensus or some form of that, right, in order to move a certain policy or practice forward. And so it's a very, when we think of community in the broad sense, it's a very hard thing, right? Because that means that we have to include folks that completely are on the far right of us as well in our conversations, as well as those on the far, left of wherever we might be in our mindset. And so, when we think of it that way, it really forces us to think about how do we govern, right? Like we're here asking, right? We're here pushing as advocates, as folks impacted by policy and practices. We're demanding, asking, pushing for, policy shifts and changes. But I'm like, y'all, real talk, we can also be governing our dang on selves and making sure that what is being created are things that we've created on the community level and are being implemented by the delegates that we've put into office, right? And so that really shifts this paradigm. And this is not something that is far-fetched. This is happening in other countries. I want everybody to just visit the site, Beautiful Solutions, by our amazing sister who helped to produce that, Alandria Williams, who recently passed away a couple of weeks ago. You know, this site, you know, at such a young age, and this site really talks about all of the ways community is actually governing and creating changes, and also leading the way and path to the development of their cities and their towns and their states. And so, you know, like so for me, when I think of community, I think of the broader sense, and I think of what does it take to engage in a process with community in that way. And so we've been doing a lot of that work in Jackson, Mississippi through our People's Assemblies, and have helped a lot of places also create People's Assemblies. And our assemblies are connected also to the Project South, Southern Movement Assemblies, which really is focused on making sure that assemblies are spread across the South so that people can exercise their right and power and voice to create policies and practices. But, you know, one of the things that I say in that is that we often find ourselves in a situation where we're in a room together talking about a particular issue that community has decided, and us as mass community are in the space, and we're gathered together to find the solutions, to create the solutions. And you will hear people with varying different solutions, but when we all narrow it back down to the common goal of creating a solution that is just and fair for all of us, it begins to eliminate the options that tend to only target the few of us or one of us. And it points that out. And that good process of facilitation helps all of us get to a place where we make the right decision. We have to trust that community can do that. And I think that this government and that the fake democracy that we have in this United States right now has caused our people, has caused us as ordinary folks and as advocates to question our own ability to do that. And I think that we can actually change that by engaging in that practice. So the first step is voting. And then the second step is continuing on and getting together and building that political infrastructure in your local town or city.
Thank you so much for that. And, you know, this is a quote that, has been top of mind, especially when, just everything that has been happening right now and even in your own work. And it's, the quote by Ella Baker, where she says, strong people don't need strong leaders. And, I want to bring this question to you all, like, how can we create a culture that spreads out instead of spreads up? And you sort of talked a little bit about it already, this idea that when we actually come together, we are already eliminating so many of the, varying factors. But how can, again, we create a culture that spreads up and actually, in a local town, right? That when we're thinking about community, it has to start locally. So I want to start with you, Gabby. What do you think?
There's a few things that I can think of, but just one thing that I know I've personally been working on and something that's personally helped me is starting when you're young. So I'm from Detroit, a place that is full of organizers and activists and artists and poets and people that speak out against what is wrong. So I learned about this since I was a kid. I did my first protest when I was in the 5th grade. I learned about sweatshops in the 6th grade. I learned about global warming in the 7th. And by the 8th grade, I understood that capitalism was destroying the world. And that's because there were adults in my life that were teaching me, you are powerful, you are the future. Here's the world as it is right now. You did not create this and neither did we, but we are living in it and we are fighting for a better tomorrow. I think it's like one of the biggest things that we lack is right, we have across the country a lack of quality education, one that teaches our history, one that teaches us our true power, how to use true governance. I think that's a completely on purpose. It's by design to keep us questioning our own power, to keep us from understanding how it is that we came to be, to live these lives and with these issues. So for me, start them young. One thing that we did here in Michigan, I ran a program called Girls Making Change, where I trained 10 girls of color, Black and brown girls from the city of Detroit and surrounding neighborhoods, to become activists and organizers in their own right, and these are all young women who want to one day run for office. So already from the very beginning, training high school girls, young college girls, to see their power, to understand systems, to question systems, to not stand down to authority, and to know that these all connect, and how to engage in it from voting, but also organizing and talking to their people, and learning policy and advocacy. You start early, and I think if you start early, I think we see a lot of radical. I'm included in that, radical young people who see things differently. It's because we still believe it, and we've been talking about this for a while. So I hope that we continue these conversations, that we continue to invest in our young people, because I think if you get them while they're young, you have them for life. I consider myself a young person. I'm 28 years old, and I continue to work with people across the spectrum, young, elders, because once you understand how this works, you love elders, you love your community, you love everyone, you see how everyone works together. So I think it's a huge benefit to have conversations, to educate, to engage young folks. It helps to work with people then across generations, across the spectrum. And I think it's really powerful, and I think it's going to be one of the ways that we actually build forward.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering, Rukia and Sophia, what you think about that quote and how it, it applies in your own life as well.
I can definitely go. I'm trying to exercise, also making sure I step up and step back too. Right? I don't feel like I'm talking too much. So, did that quote literally, first of all, Ella Baker is the G. And I just love Ella Baker, like true ancestral mentor, like one of those, sheroes, women that truly taught us so much about like collective wisdom and collective strategy, and, what it means to truly be a leader, right? And so just love her. And so, like I literally, for me, that quote is everything. It literally is the center of how we envision change, or how I envision change. We say at the People's Advocacy Institute, our core value is that community is central, not peripheral to system change. And that those of our communities, including ourselves, that are most marginalized, folks who are experiencing the harshest realities of the poor policies and practices that have been created in this country, are the ones that should be leading us. And that we understand very clearly that leadership also looks like Black women. It looks like women in general, because we know that, women of color and just women, that it is important that we're at the core of decision-making processes. Because for so long, especially in this country, it has been about dominant male reward and benefit. And so we have to shift that, because we know that just as when people of color are lifted, it changes the entire society in a way that we all benefit. We know that when women are lifted, it changes the entire society in a way that we all benefit. And so for me, when we talk about strong, what is it? Strong communities don't need strong, I forgot the quote because I'm horrible at remembering quotes off the top of my head.
People don't need strong leaders.
Thank you. When we talk about strong people don't need strong leaders, it goes back to her other quote, that we are the leaders that we all been waiting for. The one that I consistently say over and over again, because it's the truth. As strong people who survive in this country, we survive every day. We are able and capable. We don't necessarily need, when we talk about strong leaders, some of us will say that the current president is a strong leader because he talks strongly, because he talks dominantly. He doesn't, back down or let other people have a word in. He makes sure that he takes up most of the space, right? Well, that quote goes directly to that. You don't need that because you're strong in yourself and can make change. It may not look the same in how you exercise your power, but it's still power. And so, yeah.
Thank you for that affirmation. I think we all need that, especially after, yesterday's presidential debate. And I, since you mentioned him, I did want to, bring up the fact that Donald Trump has been flirting with the idea of not leaving office, and that, or even surpassing the 8-year mark. And I wanted to, ask you all this question, starting with Sophia, despite the results of this year's election, how can we lead in community? And in other words, what organizing models do we need as we face new challenges on November 4th, right? Because we don't want to lie to ourselves and say that it's all going to be gone once, Donald Trump is out of office. This is, the system's bigger than him. What organizing models do you think we need moving forward?
Thank you for that question. And for the previous question, I just want to touch a little bit on that. I never heard that quote before, but seeing it now, I see myself in that, because I think politics came to me. I didn't go to politics. I just saw a need in my community, and I was like, I really need to step up. And what Gappy said, we really need to invest in youth because they are the future, and we really need to support them in becoming leaders in their own communities. But in terms of Donald Trump and organizing for this upcoming election and for any election, I think we need to just hold our communities tight and honestly, and continue to support them, not only in the election season, but beyond election season and all year around. Because right now there's a lot of attention about talking about community needs, about what can be better, what cannot be better, challenges, struggles. But after November 3rd, it's very quiet, and people feel like they're forgotten. So what we really need to do is honestly build sustainable work that is very intentional and that supports our communities all year around. That means holding community meetings. That means bringing community members together. That means giving people food. That means knowing that someone is out there for them and listening to them. That means providing the necessary resources and support that they continue to need, even though this election may not go the way we want it to go. We just want to make it very important to them that we do hear them and we do see them.
Gabby, I welcome your thoughts, and Rukia on this particularly.
Thank you. This question actually gives me goosebumps because we're talking about something that is more like authoritarian, something that is really against our democracy and things that we actually believe in. And that's really terrifying. So I think for us at We the People Michigan, here in Michigan as a whole, we're already talking about what it would look like if there was a contested election, if there was this I'm not leaving office even though I lost, or I'm just going to declare myself the winner the night of election, even though not all the ballots are counted. So there are a few things that we're thinking about already. Here in Michigan, we're coming together with grassroots organizations because we exist. We are out there. They are in your states. They are Black and brown and queer, beautiful people that have been doing this work, have been building and serving their people who are ready and waiting for you to join in the work. So find those folks. We need ourselves to support each other. As the election, I am now deeply worried and deeply interested in getting people out to vote as much as possible. So I know some of the things that we're doing here is on Fridays, we have this thing being led by youth organizers in Detroit called Freaking Vote Fridays. Just go vote, bring your family, bring your grandma, bring your aunt that can vote, your cousins that can vote, your siblings and votes. There are many states right now where we're voting early as possible. So making sure that we're actually doing that because I don't want it to come to election night and me think, oh no, I didn't ask my 10 neighbors I could vote to vote. And right now it's looking pretty red, right? So there are things that we can start to do right now to organize to make sure that we don't have to fight that hard when it comes to election. I am tired. I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to do that. That's a lot. So we can start to do the work now. But to your point, if election night comes and we do hear this kind of authoritarian narrative, we have to hit the streets, and we are ready to hit the streets and ask for all the votes to be counted, for all the ballots to be counted, for our democracy to actually be upheld, and for us to declare a winner when the time is right, when the votes are all counted, and when it's clear who the winner is. And after that, we'll see. After that, I'm praying to God the results come in our favor. We're able to this time not just accept, right, the Democratic nomination. We have to now organize against now this party who has said that they're not going to defend against the police, that they're not going to actually uphold the things that we want on the ground. So that just sounds like more work to me, which is fine. I'd rather do that work than fight against an authoritarian. But if that does happen, to Sophia's point, where is the food? Where is the housing? Where are the lawyers? Where's the support in our community to make sure that our people are okay? And those things also exist. Those things are also possible. One inspirational thing for us in our community is when COVID hit and the government did not respond on time, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. We came together, and many communities came together and started mutual aid groups. Here in Southwest, we raised around $80,000. Money was given to around 300 families. We provided diapers for parents every other week. Food was delivered to elders. We did our work in making sure that our people were okay, because I knew that we weren't going to be. We knew that we weren't going to be. But together, we can and we are. So there are many things that we need to do, but it's possible. Lots of the things are rolling. It's about getting engaged in one of those lanes.
Yeah, I just echo everything that Gabby just said, and it's so true. We already know what it is for us to respond, to create rapid response initiatives, coalitions, and efforts. We've been doing that since COVID hit us, right? And so we got to continue that work into the electoral realm. And so, if it gets to that point, we need to already be connected right now. Connect to an organization. If you're not with an organization, connect to one. The Movement for Black Lives, we are made up of over 150 organizations. So if you are looking for an organization, you can just go to like m4bl.org and just look up some of the ones that we're working with, which are across the nation. Everyone here on this call is connected to an organization. So just really look and see where do you fit in, what is the best fit for you, and be a part so that when the time comes, whenever it is, it might not be that we have to worry about fighting against an authoritarian government, because we might win and he just accepted, and that's good, right? That's what we were hoping for, right? But in the case that we do at any point have to organize immediately, you being a part of an organization will make that faster, will make it quicker, quicker, fast, same thing, but we'll make it possible in a more organized way that allows for us to move. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks, Gabby. And also, I'm a Detroit native, but Mississippi raised. So I'll just say that.
Amazing, amazing. I am feeling so inspired, and I wanted to bring it to this discussion because I think it's the tension between, our needs right now and then justice, right? That we are fighting for this long-term justice. And I think that, you both highlighted this, the fact that we have to take care of our everyday needs. And that means the food, that means the diapers, that means the calling, that means from now to November 3rd, but that also means looking beyond, right? And that is the long haul in which we are actually and actively looking at as well. And that means, getting involved and getting organized. And I want to invite, the audience to also ask questions to our panelists. And one of the ones that I want to start with is, this came out of an idea that, once you are an elected official, how do we create a system of accountability, right? For folks like us that are advocates, but also people who are elected as well. How do we create that communication? Because, I think, this entire panel, one of our biggest critiques that I have witnessed is that, we have people who are elected and who don't look like us, but it's also not enough that if they do get elected, they look like us, right? So how can we start to build this system of accountability between the public and also those who are elected? Because, you know, sometimes when you do become elected, it's a lonely road by yourself, right? And how can we, you know, on the public side also champion, you know, the work that you are all doing? So, you know, I'm opening that up to any of you, whoever wants to take it on first.
I can go first. So I think that a sense of, you know, holding elected officials accountable is extremely important, because, you know, after election seasons, it feels like elected officials are just disappear and really don't go back to the communities that they have been advocating a year for and trying to get their votes. So there's a lot of communication gaps, and in order to honestly solve that is to have like monthly meetings. When I first got elected, which was before the pandemic, my hope was that I would have a meeting with my constituents every month, just to talk about what, you know, major projects that we voted for, big things that are going on the council. Because to be honest, we're all like everyday hardworking Americans, and who, you know, even single moms who or dads that do multiple jobs and can't really like tune into a council meeting at 7 p.m. at night, when they have like 5 kids to put to bed. So it's really important for elected officials to step up and meet their constituents where they're at. And that means like maybe sending newsletters on a monthly basis to constituents to update them on things, being like available on social media and on phone calls, and also holding like a monthly meeting with the entire community to really have a good dialogue and communicate conversations. So, and one more thing is that it is at times lonely to be an elected official, especially, you know, pre-election. There's a lot of hype and people are just very energized and excited to be voting for you. But after elections, it's just very quiet. And it is really like no one to blame for that. But I think that even on the community side and even on the elected official side, we can all like come together and figure out a way to continue to have that communication and dialogue.
I'll jump in because one of those ways to do exactly what Sophia is talking about is, again, through the assembly process. Sorry, I just mentioned it so much because it has been so important and fruitful for the work that we've been doing. But, you know, in our assembly in Jackson, for example, and this is not the case everywhere, we've helped to establish assemblies in Lansing, Michigan now, and then they led a they've created a youth statewide assembly. We've done so to help in New Jersey and Newark. And we've helped in Texas, in Dallas, for them to create assembly processes for their defund work that they're doing out there, and a number of other places. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. But in Jackson, the uniqueness of our assembly is that it is an assembly that includes, when we have a friendly administration, the administration, right? So elected officials participate as residents in the assembly process. They don't get a special seat, you know, at the front of the room. They get a seat at the table where we're all talking about the particular issues that are happening and the solutions that help to repair those issues. One example I give of that is my father, Chokwe Lumumba, the late Chokwe Lumumba. When my father first was elected to city council person, number one, he was elected because of an assembly process. When Katrina happened in 2005 in Mississippi and throughout the Gulf Coast, we were devastated. And what we recognized, it was actually Katrina and the work of young people that shifted my father's political ideology and helped him evolve to actually use electoral politics and electoral elections as an electoral strategy or tactic towards our liberation. Prior to that, my father did not believe in participating in the electoral process, period, and had never voted. He voted for the first time in his life at age 61 when he voted for himself as city council person. And so through that, though, Yeah. And he did so after being asked by the community members to run for office. And that came through a people's assembly when folks were saying, we can't continue to sit around and talk about freeing the land when we don't even have the right or opportunity to the resources of the land, because we don't have anyone in power that actually cares enough about community to shift that dynamic. And so, when he became council person, it was the assembly process that actually guided his decisions as a council person. So he would walk into a people's assembly and say, this is the proposal coming up. How should I vote? And then residents would indicate and offer their various opinions and reach a consensus in that room around how they should move forward. So, I mean, the assembly process is one that can actually engage in a co-governance process where as community, we are engaging in the process of making decisions around that. The other thing, though, is that I think that, Sophia raised a really, really important point around when we elect our delegates, when we elect community members that we've chosen to run for office, right? Or who we deeply support, like Sophia and others, when we elect them, we can't abandon them, right? We can't continue our advocacy as usual. We have to actually shift how we engage with them and recognize that these are people that we've put into office to achieve the goals that we asked them to achieve. And so in order to do that, we have to support. So we have to create a process around that, a process that does not, ignore the fact that things got to get done, but a process that allows for accountability and co-development, right? And so accountability doesn't always mean making sure that the person is doing right. Accountability means that we're both engaged in a process to reach our common goal and end in the right way. And so, how do we communicate our concerns with folks we've put into office? How do we continue to educate, inform, and provide them with the resources that they need to even push policies through? And most importantly, how do we show our continued support in the streets? Like, so for example, if we know that we want to see cops out of schools, and we know there's a whole body of folks who don't want to see cops out of school, what are we doing to lift our voice in a way that makes us so loud and big that if Sophia or anybody else who's elected was ready to push policy through that said cops out of school, that they can't deny pushing that forward, but they still support it. They feel that they have people behind them to support them in that effort. Without our voices as community behind those that we put into office, it makes the job a lot harder, and we're not doing our part.
I just want to add briefly, yes to everything that's been said. And Rakia, to your point, it's really beautiful to hear your dad's experience, because I was asked last year to run for office for county commissioner here in my community. And it was something that people came to me and they said, hey, there's a seat, there are current commissioners who do not reach out to us. We have no idea who they are. They've been in office for over 20 years. We don't know what they do. We just know that we get a newsletter from them once a year to remember their name, but it's really just full of pictures, but I have no idea what the budget is. I have no idea what the decisions are. So for me, knowing that no one knows about county commissioners or county governments and how important prosecutors are, sheriff offices are, my campaign was that it was an inclusive already, like before I was even in office, just as a candidate, I was centered in political education and engagements. So I had meetings in my living room with brilliant friends and neighbors, and we would go through the budgets, and together we would say, what do we need in our community? I, through my social media, would create graphics, and I would say, here's the county budget. What do we want to see in our community? And I did not expect to run during a pandemic. But I did, and everyone that knows who has run for office knows that you win by raising money, by raising dollars and knocking on doors. I was not able to knock on doors. I chose not to put my neighbors in harm's way by knocking, right, by doing all that work. But we did, through my whole process, shift the narrative around county government. We did win election nights, and we lost by 1,200 absentee votes, absentee ballots against a 20-year incumbent. Me, a 20-year-old community organizer, almost be a 20-year incumbent. I think that's really huge. And to Rukia's point, it was because I engaged people from the very beginning, and I had a plan. I had a plan if I was to win, how to continue that engagement. The people that I was meeting with in my living rooms, the people that helped me in my campaign, I was going to hire as my staff. And we were going to start to begin to have those monthly check-ins, to continue our newsletters, to continue. I was doing Instagram lives, so like times are changing. There are different tools and resources that we can use to engage our people, and we should be doing that because we should be engaging them in the process and having them know what it is that you're doing and having them tell you what it is that they want to see. Like, I don't think this work is that hard if you're doing it with other people. They tell you what they want. You just do it. Go ahead and do it. And it's like how we build is how we listen, how we co-govern.
Wow, exactly. I think that this is exactly what we need, especially with the accountability, not only of elected officials, but also, like Rukia said, raise our voice, right? That, when we do elect these folks, that doesn't mean that the relationship ends there. And how do we continue to build that relationship? And I do think and hope that, that narrative is shifted. And so, we're almost up on time, but I want you all to answer this question. What would you want the next generation of leaders to know with everything that you have said today? What's one thing that, especially young voters of color and just young folks in general, what do you want them to know?
Oh, is it me? Okay. I want young voters to know, young people to know that your voice and your position matters. It probably matters more than many of us who no longer fit into the category of young, because you are literally, in so many ways, and have historically, young people have literally made the change happen that needed to happen throughout this world. And so that is still the case today. And so I just want to really highlight that and lift that up. And the other thing is just to say that you have an opportunity and we need to support you in really shifting how elections in this country are operated and how democracy is run in this country. And so through your engagement in this process, we can really create a whole new system that you are leading and guiding, that you then help to create additional generations that continue it on in the future. So thank you.
Quickly, my message for young people and just for minority youth is that they are so powerful in so many ways that they don't see and sometimes know. But using, their voice is extremely important, and just paying attention to what happens in their community. Sometimes we're just so very busy and we can't always pay attention, to be honest with you, especially what happens at our local government level or in the school system or, in other sectors that are decision-making areas. But as long as you pay attention even a little bit, and when election season does come around and you do vote, but also encourage like 5 of your other friends to vote, that's extremely important. And you will elect someone who is from the community, who has similar background and similar experience as you, because that is just so critical and so important to have someone who look like you and someone who you can relate to and share an experience with, to be representing you at the halls of power.
I would just like to add that it's possible. That it's possible to create the world that we want to see, to create the communities that we need, to infiltrate the system and stop the harm for now as we continue to build what we want to see outside of the system. I think it's possible to create something outside of the current system that we have right now. This wasn't always here, right? It was built, it was created. So to that end, we have to learn, we have to unlearn, we have to relearn, we have to redefine and reimagine. And I would just really encourage everyone, every young person, to use the power that they know that they have or power that they may not know that they have. acknowledge that it's there because it is, and that it's possible to use it. And I would really push folks to think about building power outside of the elections. Building power can look like talking to your neighbors and making sure that they're okay, asking them what's going on in the community, trying to understand what the issues are and the systems that be. I think it's possible. I think we are smarter than we're told. I think we're more brilliant than most people want us to be. And it's up to us to know that and to use that to create the possibilities that we all want to see. I'm very hopeful that we can do that. I work every single day in trying to create that, and I really encourage other people to join because it's possible.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much. This has been truly informative. It has been nourishing for us, especially with everything going on right now, that we need this vision forward, and we need a vision that holds, accountability, right? For everybody that we are in community with, and that we focus on the local level while also maintaining that long-term vision for our future. And like you all said, it is possible, and we are going to make it happen, and we are the reasons why it'll work. So I want to thank you to my amazing panel, Gabby, Rukia, and Sophia. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all. Thank you. Really great being on with you guys.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. And we're going to be moving to some, small and short closing remarks from myself and Carol, and, really visioning forward. So I would like to invite Carol back. But yeah, I just want to thank you again to everyone who joined us and everyone who worked to make this happen today. This was truly a transformative experience that is only the beginning of a national and global conversation of what our world can look like, with Black and Brown young folks leading. We know that this current system is functioning exactly as it is supposed to, and that our role is to hold the urgency of this time while also visioning forward. It's clear that we must do more than vote in November, that we must continue to organize, and that our organizing efforts must center Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and that we must vision forward. And what does visioning forward mean? Visioning forward means creating a new system and a future that is not grounded in white supremacy, capitalism, racism, transphobia, and all systems of oppression. Visioning forward means living in a world where we honor the earth, the communities around us, and our collective voices. Visioning forward means also building rest in our responses. We must disrupt the sense of urgency that we are battling every day and call ourselves to rest. And rest to me means cultivating time for our dreaming. And as we know, the system wants to deprive us of everything, but it will not deprive us of our collective imagination. And so I call on all of us to create a common vision of our society that is rooted in collectivism, that is not tied by oppression, but that is tied by justice and joy. And, in the words of Ella Baker, we have to understand that they, as well as you and I, cannot be free in America or anywhere else in the world where there is capitalism and imperialism until we can get people to recognize that they themselves have to make the struggle and have to make the fight for freedom every day, in the year, every year, until they win it. So let's do everything that we can today, tomorrow, and every day to save our democracy. And we must do it in community, knowing that on November 4th, we will face new challenges that we can and shall overcome together. Thank you so much.
Just a quick word of thank you to all of our amazing panelists, to Dr. Kathy Cohen, Dr. Ibram Kendi, and to all of you for joining the first Other Swing Voter convening. This has been an incredible beginning to a much needed discussion. We do need your help in thinking about future Other Swing Voter programming. So you will receive an evaluation via your registration email today. And we hope you'll share your thoughts on today's convening and suggestions you have for future events. I invite you to check out the Antiracist Research Center website for more on the programming that they're leading at Boston University. and demos.org for more on our work to achieve a truly inclusive multiracial democracy. Thanks again. I look forward to the next time we connect and really appreciate you being with us today.